Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Grafton Select Board Workshop here for December 8, 2020. It's at 7:04 p.m. As a preliminary matter, my name is Peter Carlson. I'll be chairing the Select Board meeting this evening. Please permit me to confirm that all members anticipated to speak and be present on this agenda can hear us. Members of the Select Board, when I please call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mr. Fazio.
Fazio here.
Crofton.
Often here.
Roy.
Roy here.
Bisbee.
Here.
And Peter Carlson's here. All applicable staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mr. Canoyer?
Canoyer present.
Mr. McGoldrick?
Present.
Mr. Terenzini?
Present.
Anticipated speakers on the agenda this evening, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Ms. Ginny Kramer?
She'll sign in as we get a little bit closer, Peter.
Okay, that works for me. Thank you. Okay. Good evening, everyone. This open meeting of the Town of Grafton Select Board is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the Governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted to the town's website at www.grafton-ma.gov, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of this meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. Please note, all members today, that this meeting will not feature any public comment. For this meeting, the Select Board is convened via Zoom meeting, as posted at the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, be aware that others may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording and viewed by the public. All supporting materials have been provided to members of this body, are available at the town website, and when final minutes are posted, unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I, the chair, note otherwise. Just some basic ground rules tonight, everybody, please. When I introduce the speakers on the agenda, after they conclude their remarks, I'll go down and look for any members who wish to comment or ask a question. Please hold until your name is called. Please also remember to mute your computer or phone when you're not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait for the chair to yield the floor to you and state your business before the board. And any vote that it be taken tonight will be conducted by roll call. All right, now that I got through that, thank you everybody for coming out tonight. First up on our agenda this evening was before we get into the agenda, ladies and gentlemen, and if I don't have any objections from the board, I am going to make some changes to the agenda this evening. With the board's permission, I would like to move the Grafton Sustainability Commission and solid waste collections to the January workshop. Does anyone have any objections to that? Thank you. I know we've got a lot to cover tonight. Thank you very much for that. Mr. Terenzini, we'll follow up on some of those items tomorrow. We talk about moving solid waste to January. Okay?
Yes, it's a large budgetary impact, so the sooner I can get the sense of direction from the board, the better I can begin to prepare a response.
Understood. Okay, Mr. Often and then Mr. Fazio.
Yeah, that was the one question that I had in terms of there's a
potentially big impact on whether we do fees to compensate on the increase, whether we go out to bid. And also we had discussed as a board the idea that we probably need to get some public input in the process. So I hate to say it, but maybe we keep that one for tonight.
Well, I'll move that in with FY22 revenue projections and general budget discussions. Does that work for everyone, seeing how it does have a major impact to that?
Yep.
Mr. Fazio, did you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, can you just restate the January date for the workshop that we talk about sustainability benchmarking and maybe phase B of this trash conversation? Do we have a date picked out?
We don't have an exact date, but it's looking to be on or about January 12th.
Okay.
Okay.
So yes, I would be in favor of starting that discussion tonight under budgeting and then, maybe pushing some additional details off to the first workshop.
Perfect. All right. Thank you very much for that input, everybody. Is everyone okay with that then? No objections? Thank you. All right. So tonight we have first up on our agenda. I want to thank everyone for coming in tonight to talk about the sidewalk programs and status. We have with us tonight Grafton Town Planner, Mr. McGoldrick, and DPW Director, Mr. Knoyer. I'm going to hand this over. This is just a general open discussion. How do we want to begin? Mr. Terenzini, did you want to start with a statement? Or?
Yeah, this is the way that the process that we began at the first workshop truly evolves. We solicit ideas from the Select Board on what their goals and objectives are. We had the second workshop that was formally voted at your last board meeting. It now resides on your webpage. If you go, you'll see your goals and objectives for FY21 to FY24 have been posted there for the public at large. And then they are circulated to the several departments, and we begin to have a conversation about what impact does this have? Do you need staffing? Do you need implementation money and the like? So what we'd like to do tonight is to have Mr. McGoldrick, Mr. Knoyer give you a bit of an idea of the background data that they have to work with, where they see this thing heading, just kind of as a check-in to make sure that we've captured your intents correctly, and we can keep this thing moving forward so that we don't get too far downstream and find out that we really didn't capture what you were wanting to do. So this is the process, and we thank you for letting Chris and Paul have a few moments of your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want me to share the presentation, or are you able to?
I can do that. Yep. You gave it to me 1 second. I'll pull it right up. Thank you.
While it's coming up, I'll just say, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you for having me here tonight to discuss the status of sidewalks in town and the direction in which we're moving in terms of meeting the select board's stated goals.
Everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. We can go to the next slide. So I like to start my presentations with scary photos. As you can see here, none of these are existing any longer, but these are representative of some conditions that have been in Grafton in the past in terms of sidewalks and what we see as the issue that the select board is looking to address, whether it's lack of sidewalks, deteriorated sidewalks, or layouts that end up not being fully implemented or end at a certain point for project constraints or what have you. We can go to the next slide. So obviously the first thing we do is we look at the existing efforts and previous data that we can build off of rather than reinventing the wheel. The first and foremost, we have the bicycle and pedestrian plan, last updated in August 2016. Going through those and looking at the specific recommendations outlined by the bicycle and pedestrian plan, it's found that most of them are in progress but have not been fully implemented at this time. And so really we're going to be looking at, finalizing or starting what hasn't been started in terms of these recommendations moving forward. We can go to the next slide. So this is just a snapshot of some of the things that the 2016 plan has to offer. On a broad sense, it's there's a lot more than just this, but one of the main points is it does provide a priority analysis for both North Grafton and South Grafton, outlining transportation routes that they find that in 2016 were found to be the most traveled and most in need of attention. We can go to the next slide. And so this is just the South Grafton map as well. Next slide, please. Another thing that is partially coming out of the 2016 plan, we did in August 2020 we are finalizing the Grafton curb ramp inventory and sidewalk inventory. So this includes actual GIS data points with all of the sidewalks in town, including types, materials, condition, whether or not it has detectable panels. So there's a lot of detail that's included in this data, and we're hoping to wrap this up shortly. If you go to the next slide. So the sidewalk inventory is similar to the curb ramp inventory. Obviously, the data is a little bit catered to actual sidewalk detail, but similarly creates a lot of points in a GIS format with the different inventory of data sets. Next slide, please. So where do we go from here? Pulling from that 2016, as well as other efforts that we're moving forward with in town. First and foremost, updating the master plan is going to be crucial to creating a comprehensive review. I'm not going to lecture on the importance of the master plan, but it does create the comprehensive and public input and comprehensive review of the town's goals and objectives, and helps us to frame that and solidify this as a priority moving forward for the town. The proposed funding and strategy for the master plan update has been included as a capital plan request. And part of the budget is we are requesting additional staffing in the planning department to help with the anticipated workload that would come on within efforts of updating a master plan. We're also looking to move forward with the Complete Streets program. So this program consists of 3 tiers. Once becoming a tier 3 community, the town would be eligible for up to $300,000 in annual reimbursements for eligible road update program construction and infrastructure. And so there's, again, included in the capital plan request, we have a strategy outlined for going through the 3-tier phases and funding that program. Additionally, the planning board has been working on updating the subdivision rules and regulations. I note that this work has been largely done through the volunteer efforts of board members. Frankly, I have been meaning to get to the updates that the board members have provided, but it's moving slow due to lack of staff capacity to review all of these updates. But that is something that is ongoing. Also, as noted, that sidewalk and curb ramp inventory, we'd like to finalize that. And then additionally, there is a Safe Routes to School program that was implemented in town. The 2016 Bike Ped plan notes that they were looking to develop a committee. So looking at the progress of where that committee stands and evaluating if there's potential for staff support of that committee, as well as coordinating with schools to evaluate if expanding the Safe Routes to School program would be able to provide transportation savings through bus routes and things like that. Next slide, please. So additional potential projects, these are going to require additional either staff capacity or funding to complete. But obviously, first and foremost, revising that Grafton bike and pedestrian plan. It includes a lot of data, but being from 2016, it's starting to get dated. And if we're moving forward with a master plan update, it could dovetail really nicely with that effort in order to create a updated version of that plan and further drill down into the details moving forward. Developing an inspection and maintenance program would be helpful as we get the data that specifies the condition of the infrastructure that we do have existing. Making that inspection and maintenance program that will update the data and address issues as the roads eventually deteriorate, as everything does, would be helpful. The transit-oriented overlay zoning is an effort that is outlined in that plan. We've currently implemented the 40R in the village mixed-use zoning districts, but have not fully implemented the transit-oriented overlay zoning that was specified. So that's an effort that the planning department would be willing to undertake, but again, we would need additional capacity for that effort. Moving on from that, expanding the sidewalk inventory to include bike and trail inventory. There may be some effort with the CMRPC. They were working on a regional trail mapping exercise, but frankly, that effort, I believe, has petered out, but we may be able to take the torch and bring that back to reignite that effort if that's something that the town is interested in. Additionally, downtown wayfinding and branding is outlined. There is a Massachusetts Downtown Initiative grant that allows for a study to do wayfinding and branding exercise. So actually creating and works with the residents to include to create a brand for the downtown, helping for marketability and wayfinding. So that's a multifaceted approach. And then traffic calming and green infrastructure. And note that the police department received the $6,000 grant for pedestrian and bicycle safety. So that's a great accomplishment there. But then while we're updating the subdivision rules and regs and zoning, there may be opportunity to evaluate alternatives, actually including green infrastructure and traffic calming measures into the zoning or into the subdivision rules and regs. There's also the shared winter spaces grant that I'm hoping to provide an application for. That's based off of the shared spaces grant, which was $300,000 for kind of outdoor infrastructure related to businesses for COVID-19 or any kind of outdoor activities. And that has been expanded up to $500,000, as well as allowing a more broad range of opportunities for winter outdoor and multimodal transportation opportunities. So hopefully moving forward with that as well. Next slide, please.
I'm waiting for you, Chris. So.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Right, go ahead.
So as with any of these projects, there's challenges and opportunities that we can anticipate. There's going to be some that we can't anticipate, but things that we know will be challenging. Narrow rights of way. There are several in town that, as we look at our existing road infrastructure, the right of way may not allow for the full 5-foot sidewalk on both sides and 11-foot travel lanes. And so working within that space is always a challenge. There's also oftentimes mailboxes or other encroachments where people may not know exactly where the right of way is. And those kinds of things wind up in the town right away. And so addressing how each of those items gets addressed when you go for any of these projects can be challenging. There's also street trees, utilities, and stone walls that are often either nearby, would be damaged, could be damaged. And so those are challenges in terms of how those can be worked around, grading, drainage, and infrastructure. There's always catch basins, culverts, retaining walls, steep slopes next to the roadway, which would need to have significant engineering involved. And so, resources, funding, and staff capacity to address these challenges is always a need. And generating and sustaining public support is also a need. If we start to move forward with this and start expending resources and staff capacity, we need to keep the public behind us, to keep the effort sustainable. Next slide, please. So I'll just kind of briefly go through these. These are some examples that Paul took.
Want me to just jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
So we went to a couple of locations based off that 2016 preliminary work that was done. So this is Carroll Road. The slide on the left is Carroll Road facing kind of north and east from about Janet Circle, showing the area where a sidewalk would need to be located. And from this location going north, obviously there's utility poles, street trees, easement requirements just because of the encroachments. Because, for example, Main Street in South Grafton is a 60-foot right-of-way. Carroll Road is not. There's no real street layout from this, so all that would need to be done. Once you cross the railroad tracks, it's a pretty sharp drop-off onto people's property or the right-of-way. Either way would require a significant fill, and any drainage work that would be required, requires some significant upgrades since there is no drainage really, other than country drainage on Carroll Road. The other photo on the right from the same location, obviously showing on one side of the street the significant street trees that are there, the stone wall located behind it. The right-of-way is the stone wall, so any sidewalk on that side would require the removal of all those trees. The other side of the road has all the utility poles, again, which would require relocation of all those easements from private property owners along with street trees. This area was looked at in 2016, and the residents really, when we reached out to them, had no interest in giving the easements for, on their property for a sidewalk. And the total cost was upwards from going from about the Swirls and Scoops area up to Countryside to catch the two neighborhoods was about $400,000 to catch that distance, including all that work. Peter, if you go to the next slide. So this is North Street, again, heading towards the North Street Elementary School. Both photos are pointing south. The photo on the left is the intersection near Old Westboro Road. The sidewalk would need to be located on the right-hand side of the photo, only because it's a significant crossing there. You can't be that close to the intersection and try and do a crossing. So you need the sidewalk in this location. Obviously, private property encroachments, stone wall movements, utility encroachments, street trees, privately owned trees. Again, no drainage. So when curbs are installed for the sidewalk, drainage would be an issue where that would have to be installed. The photo to the right is the Stonegate Circle neighborhood, exit or entrance, however you want to describe it. Same situation, large, old, mature street trees, stone walls, narrow road. Again, no real layout, so that would all need to be done first. We didn't get a cost estimate on this. It's therefore just an example of areas where, if we're looking for safe routes to school, where the sidewalks would be most likely used, and just the difficulty getting those sidewalks built with the current situation. Next one, Peter. And this is the other area that was really looked at and vetted back in 2016. The bottom of Worcester Street sidewalk ends at the State Police Barracks on one side and almost across the street from the American Legion on the other. The location is It's horrible for a sidewalk. There's steep drops on either side of the road where the guardrails are located. The state owns right to the Legion driveway, so it's half state, half town. There's significant drainage along the tree line on the northbound lane that would have to be addressed, and drainage issues on the southbound lane going up the hill that would also need to be addressed. The state's advice back in 2016 was literally verbatim. It's a challenging section of sidewalk to install, and it would be best accomplished during a significant update of the road in the future. So that's where that one ended up. And again, the design to go a short distance, really from 1,500 feet, was almost $400,000, just due to all the, again, moving of the utilities, easements on private property, retaining walls that would need to be done, drainage infrastructure that would need to be improved, and the signals down at the intersection. That's it.
Thank you for that, Chris and Paul. Before we go, any questions that first pop out? Mr. Terenzini, and then we'll follow up with Mrs. Roy.
Yeah, could I ask you to go back to the first set of photographs that Chris had brought up showing the disappearing sidewalks in portions of the town? Perfect. So I don't want to get too hung up on this area is too difficult, this area might be real easy. The important thing of this process is first for the board to clearly identify to the staff what is important to you. When we first discussed, it was like, we don't really know, but then we found all this information that had been worked on and it simply hadn't been followed through. In part for lack of staffing, but also because there was no clear signal from the select board to the staff that this was a high priority to the select board. So the goals and objectives tell the staff what's of high priority to you. That then shapes a discussion, and Chris and Leah and I have been having that discussion of what can we do, amending some of the subdivision regulations, special permits and the like, so that some of the things that come up can be dealt with at the staff level as opposed to full planning board hearings. Can we get them moved to the electronic permitting more so that plan reviews can be done more readily? Yes, we need a little more staff, they say, and then the bean counter cheapskate says, yeah, but we can't really afford it. So, okay, how are we going to pay for that? The important thing here is to show you how this process works, but also to give you a sense of where the staff thinks they could head with this, and to say to you, did we miss the mark? Is this on mark? Is this what you envisioned? And then we can have the next stage of the discussion when we go through the budget process of the resources that we knew to deliver on the goals and objectives that you have set. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Roy?
Thank you for the presentation and the inclusion of the bicycle and pedestrian plan. Did you guys include the ADA self-evaluation at all? I think they touched on sidewalks as well.
I didn't include that in this presentation, but we have updated it for the open space and recreation plan. So that is up to date as well.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Frisbee?
So I have to apologize. I'm running on a really bad internet connection tonight. So if I cut out at all, just let me know. So that presentation triggered something in me that and this isn't about the sidewalks or the planning or DPW, but it drives me berserk when we want to get something done in local government and all we can do is think of reasons why we can't do something. And you're right, this is where we were in 2016, and we came up with a lot of reasons why we couldn't do something in 2016. And then we said we'd study it more, and we come up with more plans. And still, during the winter time, I'm dodging kids walking on Millbury Street to school because for some reason, we can't come up with 100 yards of cement to go from Blanchard Road to the middle school on Millbury Street. Like, I don't want to hear why we can't do a couple particular sidewalks. I want to know which ones are easier to do than others and how we can get those done. That goals list was a lot of these words: revise, consider, review, evaluate, update. Nowhere in there was there construct. And I know that's not your fault. That's our fault, or at least the fault of the people that were in these meetings before, because we never gave clear instruction that, yes, this is a priority. Yes, we want to go do this. It's a sidewalk or some sidewalks. We're saying as a board, and I can completely understand if I were in your position, I'd be like, nah, these guys, this is their goal this year. Next year, it'll be something else. No, I'm telling you, it's not unreasonable to expect in a community of 20,000 people that's bordering on the size of a legal city to have some sidewalks that go from subdivisions to schools to keep kids out of a road. So if we could identify those and pursue those, that would make me as an elected official and my constituents who put me here, I think, happier than they otherwise would be. A little bit of advice, Chris. Thank you for the presentation. Just months after an override, we can't be going to the community with staffing. Every other bullet point was staffing. Okay, this is what it is. And I'm not just saying this to you, I'm saying that to everybody within the sound of my voice. We have to, once again, understand the economic reality that we're living in here. We're facing possibly level funded or decreased state aid next year. We're facing needs from staff for compensation that are only going to increase. The odds of us getting more staffing for you are somewhere between slim and nil. And I'm sorry to say that. We are still running a structural deficit. We're going to talk later on about our FY22 revenue projections. And I hope very soon talk about FY23 through 25, because we're right in the same place that we were in FY 2015. As far as I'm concerned right now, okay? So this is the reality that we're faced with. The constituents want things. They've set a limit for what they're willing to pay for. They told us last spring what the limit was, and our job is to make it happen and not keep thinking of reasons why it can't. So those are my thoughts on the presentation. Let's pick off some things that we know we can do, or we think we can do, or if it's within the realm of possibility that we can do, and deliver this to our constituents, the people that put me here and pay you guys, a product that will make them better off tomorrow than they were today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frisbee. Mr. McGoldrick, did you want to respond? And then we go to Mr. Fazio for a question.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to mention, and I loud and clear here what Mr. Frisbee is saying, and I think it'd be helpful for me, that the 2016 does show that, priority area analysis. I think that's one way that we can focus on specific projects in terms of getting, tangible results quickly. I'll be blunt. The Complete Streets program is going to take time, and that's not going to create tangible results quickly. It has a lot of that kind of review in the beginning. In terms of if there's specific projects, specific locations that we can focus our efforts, I'm happy to look at certain projects that we can do there. And those, the grants like the Shared Winter Spaces grant may be completely geared to that, quick implementation where they're looking at doing a temporary fix in the immediate, and then it needs to be implemented shortly thereafter. So there may be opportunities to do that, and I'm happy to work with the select board on figuring out where those exist.
Thank you. Mr. Fazio?
Thank you. So I have some thoughts, and I land eventually in the same place as Mr. Frisbee in summary, but wanted to mention a couple additional things. So first of all, thank you for this presentation, because I think first and foremost, it reminds us or explains to us what has been going on for the past few years. And, even as someone who thinks she pays attention to this stuff, I just learned a ton through the presentation of things that were actually implemented, where we are on timelines, and the work that has been done in the past. So super helpful. And I would love to continue to get more updates on, projects such as these in the future. I think the original intent of this goal, when we talked about it, the first goal is like, we want a master plan. We want sidewalks in every street in Grafton. I mean, if you're thinking big, right? And then the reality comes down of, okay, what do we actually want to accomplish now as a board? And the discussion led to, well, we think that the most important sidewalks are the ones that connect to all our schools. So, high school, Millbury Street, North Street, South Grafton, and are the children of this town, the kids in this town, able to have accessibility to that? Now, beyond that, I, as you're talking about things, Chris, like wayfinding and branding, I'm, secretly like clapping my hands, thinking about a day where Grafton can do things like this, because I think this is all tied to economic development, accessibility to businesses. I think about, the short-sightedness, perhaps, of, for example, the Complete Streets program and $300,000 annually that the town could be receiving. And I heard, along with the words of, we don't have staffing, I heard the words grants, 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 grants. And so I think it's important for us to recognize we don't have money for staffing this year for planning. However, we all have to be creative on how to figure out the best. Where do we start? Where's our starting point here? There's got to be a starting point. It's not Carroll Road, because we don't have $400,000. It's not hiring additional staffing, in my opinion, because we don't have the funding. But we're hiring another person in a new position in the town administrator's office. Is there capability for that person to perhaps take on some of the grant work that edges us toward a complete street program? Are there roads right now, like, the one that Mr. Prisby and I drive by on Millbury Street and say, for crying out loud, can we get just, 100 yards of sidewalk so, children can walk to school and home, and just hit that benchmark and say, okay, we did that. I live off the center of town on North Street, and I think, in my opinion, the work to repair an existing one, and I would say this to South Grafton Elementary School as well, places that have sidewalks that there's no more curb, and it's a very, very fast road, to going on to the Common and hitting into Westboro. How much would it be to make these a little safer for already structured sidewalks that are within a mile of a school zone? And I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation. I personally would advocate toward a master plan. Again, it's all about funding. It's all about timing. And as Mr. Prisby said, this board has to be the board that says, this is a long-term goal. This is not until one of us exits and then it changes direction again. This is our goal, and we have to take incremental steps to get there. So now we're working with, we don't have any money, we don't have any staff. Where do we go from here? And I think there's got to be a starting point, right? So thank you for being here.
Mr. Chansey, did you want to respond to that, or can I go to Mr.
Just quickly, we have identified a small source of monies. You get the annual Uber monies. They're not a great deal of money, but those monies, together with a conversation with the school department of where might we replace sidewalks or build sidewalks that might reduce transportation expenses, would be a starting point. So it's not just a full development of a master plan and then try to sort it out. I don't think we did as good a job as we could have done. My fault for not being as clear as I should have, that there are small incremental things that can be started. With respect to the staffing, we are working on how we might pay for that because the grants do, unfortunately, the grants don't tend to pay for that staff, but the grants do tend to pay for themselves in multiple ways, especially if they're energy or they're reduced school transportation and the like. So we have to have this balance of, we really need that capital money. We can't afford the staff to do it. We're not going to get that capital money if we don't have some staffing somehow. So we've been talking about how can we reorganize the workflow, as I said, reworking the subdivision rules and regs, by which some of those things become staff decisions during the course of the day, as opposed to a substantial amount of work with a board at night. Getting the permitting online, as opposed to getting everything in paper. So where do we, my apologies if we didn't do quite as good a job as getting that across, but it's not a either or, it's a big picture for the long term, small nibbles in the beginning. And I apologize for my failure to get that across properly.
Mr. Officer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I guess my observation is that I agree with a lot of what's been said so far. This needs to be a strategic initiative. This is not anything that we've said that needs to happen this year. And so, Ed, I hear what you're saying with, we don't have any, like, this is what we're going to do this year, but clearly the funding from this is going to have to come from some grants. All of that grant writing, there are prerequisites to it. Do you have community sponsorship? Do you have some engineering work that's been done? Do you have plans in place? So, I think the work that we have to do is to continue that planning and actually follow through with some of the work that's been done already, to put those things in place where we have opportunities for grants. We're in very strong positions to win those grants, to be able to get money that's not going to impact our tax rates, to be able to fund some of this stuff. So, we talk about $400,000 on Carroll Road. If you're getting a $200,000 grant that, is matched and whatnot, then we can fit that into, an overall plan and meter this out over a period of time. So I feel like, really in particular, since we're in transition to a new town administrator, we need to be much more strategic and longer term thinking in terms of our planning for some of these initiatives. So yes, we definitely have to get some things done shorter term, but the real work is in that planning and preparation and grant writing and negotiations with the grant writing authorities, the advocacy and all of that, to be able to, reasonably bring this into Grafton in a meaningful way, because it's going to be very difficult to do that within our current tax rate. So I feel like the work, really the initiatives have to go into those tasks.
Mr. Canoia, did you want to respond to that? And then we go to Mr.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Ms. Roy. I saw your hand up. I'm sorry, Colleen. Go ahead.
Oh, me.
Go ahead, Paul. Sorry.
Okay, so I brought this, so hope everybody can see it, because that should be our moniker in Grafton. Because they all start and they all end with no interconnection anywhere. And I'll go back to what Ed was saying. The town did receive a grant for a sidewalk on Millbury Street from Blanchard Road to the school. A few years ago, I was just texting Tony LeMay to find out what happened to the grant and why the work didn't get done. He doesn't know. I don't know. Nobody knows. So we did receive a grant from the state for that sidewalk. So he's going to forward me all the information to find, so I can dig through to find out where it ended up and why the work never got done. So with that was there, as from what Ed said, I don't want the public to leave this meeting thinking that we're trying to avoid the work. The work is not the part of it. Our point was it's the funding for that work and the staffing, not only for once the work is done, to maintain those sidewalks. Ed was talking about kids walking in the street to school, which I agree with. I drove a lot of the neighborhoods yesterday just to be prepared for this, to see how many people shoveled the sidewalk in front of their house and along the street line. Who's going to do that in these areas? If we're going to require the DPW staff to go down there with this, so 30% of the year, the sidewalks are potentially unusable. It takes people and equipment to do that. We have one real efficient sidewalk plow that is $188,000 to replace, that we use for brush cutting and everything else. And if we use it for more sidewalks, it's not, the longevity of that's going to end. And it's somebody to run that piece of equipment. People get worn out. The same 10 people, 20 people who are plowing your streets, and I'll use this as a great example, are fighting your fires, running your sewer department, running your water department, are up at 4 o'clock this morning at a nice event that we weren't expecting. It's not that we don't want to do the work. We would prefer to do the work. I would love to have sidewalks everywhere, to walk every day. It's a funding issue. Where can we get the money? And where are we going to get the people to maintain them once we have the money and once we have them done? Because if we don't have the funding to do that, we're throwing good money away. And it's a lot more work to get them and have them ADA compliant. As we mentioned about when Colleen brought up the ADA report. A sidewalk has to be 5 feet wide. You need a curb to keep people from jumping over the curb. You need 2 feet of space for telephone poles, mailboxes, to avoid those obstructions. You need the tactile strips everywhere. It's easements on people's driveways. It's easements into the public way. It's permanent utility easements to move the poles, to put guide wires. It's taken a long time to get the Main Street work done, and that so that area will be great. But we've got $600,000 worth of easements on that road, and that road's got a huge right of way. It's not that we don't want to do it. I would love to do these projects. It's the time and it's the money to get them done. In 2016 we started down this path, and it was like, it's going to be too much money. We'd rather get the roads done first, focus on that. Sidewalks can wait. And that's how we ended up where we are today. So
Thank
that's
you.
it for me.
Who do we have next? I think we had Mr. Prisby or Ms. Roy. Ms. Roy, then Mr. Prisby. Thank you.
I was just going to mention what Mr. Canoyer just did about the Main Street project, because what I'm hearing is the board does prioritize sidewalks, specifically the sidewalks around the schools. So if you were going to just list the schools in order, I think South Grafton should probably be lower, since Main Street's coming in and handling a lot of those sidewalks for us. That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Prisby?
Yeah, so thank you, Paul. Believe me, I understand what you're saying. Having lived in places most of my life that had sidewalks, just wait until we have to pass the ordinance that says you have to shovel the one in front of your house, and how that's going to go. And so, I get it. I've been there and done that. And I understand that what, I and the rest of the board are advocating for here is a change. And there's a reason why it's a change, and because the status quo exists for a reason, because this is difficult and there are a lot of reasons, some good, some bad, not to do it. As far as funding goes for one particular sidewalk, I'm glad to hear that there was a grant for Millbury Street. I'm dismayed as to why it didn't go anywhere. But the funding conversation is one we can have. We had the conversation back in 2016. I recall this one, that we were going to get to sidewalks later. Unfortunately, with our funding, later is it's like never, because we're never going to get enough funding to complete our capital needs and make our roads to the way we need them to be. And we've gotten to a point where the board has decided, well, here we are 4 years later, going on 5, and we're in the same spot that we were. So maybe we need to make a change and talk about Chapter 90 funding. We need to talk about the 1.5 we put away for roads, or even or free cash. That's a conversation we need to have, and this board needs to have. And I recall the last presentation about roads, and this is the one thing that people write me the most about, is their road through email. So I appreciate that. But with any change in focus, and I think this is a slight change in focus, we're going to have to talk about what we can do now. And I think, and Matt, I hear what you're saying. we need to talk about long-term and funding strategies, and I appreciate that. But I think we need to sort of walk and chew gum at the same time here. Let's get done what we can get done, talk about funding, both in the short term and long term, and develop a plan. What I would like to see is I would like to have another meeting like this where we have identified projects that we can do that don't have enormous easement issues from utilities, that don't have enormous construction costs like on Worcester Street, and that are of critical public safety importance. If we can get that Venn diagram done, we can maybe identify a few projects, get moving on something that people can see, and then in the longer term, think about what makes sense. Because, this is, again, how municipal initiatives fall apart. We start talking about, well, we need more staff. When we have more staff, we can do it. When we have a new master plan, we can do it. When the sun sets in the east, this will be easy to do. That's always how it goes. And I'm just encouraging people to think a little more aggressively about what can we do, and come up with something.
Thank you, Mr. Frisbee. Before we go to Mr. Upton, Mr. Terenzini, do you want to respond? And
Just real quickly, I think this is working. I mean, this is the process. You've laid out the goal. The staff has told you what they think they need to do something long-term and what they think they need to get the grant money available. You've told them, okay, that's fine, but don't bank on staff, but we don't want you waiting. Let's get started on something, figure out how to start picking away at it. So the board has made it clear what its goal is. It's made it clear that notwithstanding, yes, you may need master plan to get large grants and all those things. Let's get moving. And I think that this is precisely why we go through the retreat, why we set up those goals and objectives, why we share them with the staff incumbent in this. So I view this, frankly, as very productive.
Okay. Who had their hand up last? I'm sorry. Mr. Hoffman, thank you.
Yeah, Paul, look, what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of complexity here. There's a lot of costs. There's a lot of time involved and a substantial amount of effort. And so there's a reluctance to sort of get started on it. And I get that. I think we need to be trying to break things down and taking it one little bit at a time. I guess I would just urge us to get going with something, and to continue planning and preparing and continuing to slice and dice as we go along, so that understanding that, like, we may never get there in Grafton, right? But that's not a reason. Like, we may not get fully there, but that's not a reason to not do something and to not get started and to not continue with the process of planning and preparing and looking for those grants and whatnot. So I completely hear what you're saying. But I do think this is going to be a sustained initiative that we're going to continue looking at. Obviously, this has already been revisited once in a pretty meaningful way. And so here we are again. So I guess I would just encourage you to embrace the messy process that we're in right now, and let's identify some things that can be done, and just try to move forward with those things, understanding that the bigger chunk of sidewalks in Grafton, it might be a decade or two before we sort of get that critical mass of those connected sidewalks so that it actually feels different in Grafton. But the fact that it happens over that period of time, it's fine. But if we don't do anything in that 2 decades, we're going to be the same. So,
Thank you. All right, I want to wrap this up here. Mr. Fazio, do you have another question?
Yeah, just quickly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to mention something that Mr. Often just said too. So I think that what he was going on was, this has to happen at some point. I think 30 or 40 years from now, we will have sidewalks throughout Grafton, and we are not, maybe the ones that fully implement exactly what we want, but it has to start somewhere. And so it sounds like that it's starting with this board, and that's our priority. I think what would be helpful is, or at least helpful to me, is and this is to staff, identifying what we are doing now, if anything, like what is there any sort of plan in place that involves sidewalks, including the Main Street project in South Grafton? Like, do we have things in place right now identified for any sort of sidewalk repair in the next year? And then my second question would be, what is our funding? And that's a question, I think, for the board as well as the staff. And then getting into identifying staff and what do we have for staff right now to be able to work on this? And the one thing I wanted to also mention, I'm not a huge fan of creating committees all the time. I don't think any of us are, but just throwing it out there are there volunteer committees that would be helpful not only for some sort of citizen support, but also to maybe take on a little bit of the workload of identifying for us, places in town that would be identified as priority projects with the funding and the staffing we had. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Ms. Roy.
I know you're trying to wrap this up, Peter, so I was just wondering, can we add this to the ongoing issues list? I would love to have updates on this in the future, specifically what happened to the Millbury Street grant. I know Mr. LeMay and Mr. Canoyer are digging into that, but I really want to hear back what happened with that.
Yeah, Peter, I'm sorry, just to echo that, I imagine that we're going to find that the grant money is in an account where the grant money should be. Most grants work that you have to use it for the thing that you applied it to get it for within a certain amount of time. I would hate to lose it. We would look really bad if we had to return money for a project that we say we want. So let's make sure we stay on that.
Thank you. Before we get going, I haven't had a chance to really input. I'm kind of playing chair here. So, ultimately, like what I'm hearing tonight is, I think it's important for the select board to know, Paul and Chris and Carter, that, what would your criteria be in identifying these projects? And as you are pointing out, like what criteria you would use for these projects, I know funding is one of them, but also to the point of what majority of my members echo tonight is, what's the feasibility, like what's the low hanging fruit, what's the mid, and what's the real difficult ones, and categorize them. I don't know, like, Paul, similar to how we did the roads program years ago when we cataloged and identified the roads, right? And we knew which ones were going to be most expensive to repair and replace, but we also knew that there was a majority of roads that we could extend the maximum amount of linear foot per dollar that's spent. I think for myself, in help developing some sort of fiscal policy for the town to consider is knowing like how that criteria would be developed. I don't know how or how long you need to come up with that type of deliverable, but I mean, what's your sense on those next steps? And is there, like, what would be, and maybe you don't get back to us today on this, but a question to consider is, when do you believe is a reasonable time to get back to us that you would need to come back with us with these next steps that we've disclosed tonight?
The sidewalk inventory we did in the spring and summer, that we hired a consultant to do for us, has the condition of the existing sidewalks in it, over the 40 miles of sidewalk that we own. It's similar to the roads. You choose an area, and I will cite this as my example, which it's always, again, it's one of those things that's always driven me nuts. You go up Milford Road, there's 3 neighborhoods there, none of them connect. They were all built by 2 of them were built by 3 by the same developer, and a 4th developer did another one, where you can walk in your little section, but you can't go out into Milford Road and traverse to the other one without going in the street. So why that wasn't done during those development stages, I don't know. Do we look at that area and say, all right, that's fairly easy to pick off. It's a wide road. We own the road. There's not a lot of utilities there. So could we do that one? Again, it's that, if we're thinking about the schools, the Millbury Street thing, like I said, we have a grant. Hopefully we can find where that money is. North Street, there's a sidewalk to the school all the way from the Common, and then a little bit down North Street. We know what it's going to cost to further that down North Street. So I don't think that's a feasible spot to focus our money on. South Grafton Elementary School, is going to be done in the next 2 years. So we're not going to touch that. North Grafton, the sidewalks on Waterville Street. The biggest issue there is they're in poor condition. There's not a sidewalk over the bridge right before the school. So you have, there's really nothing you can do with that. Walk down the sidewalk, you have to walk in the road, then you get back on the sidewalk. So it's areas like that. So, again, myself, Chris, Brian Zirkle, we're not afraid of doing the work, Kevin. It's just a matter of, point us where you want to go and how much money you want to spend and where I'm going to get that money. Because we talked about Chapter 90, and the Chapter 90 money, we have on the docket right now a narrow bridge on Fitzpatrick Road, that's Chapter 90, the culvert over Stowe Road, that's Chapter 90 money, all the easements for Main Street that are Chapter 90 money. By the time those 3 projects are done, there's not going to be any Chapter 90 money. So it's where do you want us to find the funding? Town meeting authorized the road funding for this year already. That's done. So again, as other projects wrap up, we certainly want to continue with things. The Main Street project is a focus of a lot of mine and Brian's time right now to successfully get that launched and out the bid for April.
Yeah.
But after, we certainly will have time after that. But where do you want us to go? And that's.
I think that in order for me to help, like where I think this board can evaluate that is knowing that, what type of criteria would you come up with when identifying these, and then how much will dollars go for these types of criteria of sidewalks? And I think that's because what comes first, the chicken and the egg, yin and yang. I mean, we need to come up with and consider a policy. I think we understand that this is a priority. We talked about this for years. I'm wondering if the next step is, come back with us with some estimates on some projects that are like sub 6 figures, low 6 figures, mid 6 figures, and upper 6 figures. That way, I think from a board perspective, then I would know, what I would propose to the town for a policy. I don't know how the rest of my board members feel, but I want to know that type of information and what is it that we need to do to get to that point. I think that is, for me, that would be a next logical step. Mr. Often and Ms. Roy.
Yeah, so I think we have a great roads program. And Paul, I'm sensing that you're a little bit defensive, and I just want to recognize the work that you guys do and just say it out loud. This isn't us trying to take you to task over sidewalks. This is new. This is a goal that's just been agreed by the board. And so we're having this discussion tonight. And this is no reflection on the work that you guys do. What I'm hearing really clear is that you need some direction from the board in terms of funding and priority, and tell me what you want to do. And so that's our work to do. So, but one of the things, just my observation, one of the things that makes the road program so successful is that we actually have a program that is based on data. Right, we have the pavement condition index across all the streets. We have an actual program. It has been developed. We don't have that with the sidewalks at this point. So I guess where I go with this is, how can we extend the roads program to sidewalks and include that in the maintenance? It concerns me a lot that we don't seem to have any kind of sidewalk maintenance program at all. So we have sidewalks all over town. They're just deteriorating because we're not repairing them and maintaining them in the same way that the roads are. So I guess from my standpoint, I would like to see something similar to what we have with the roads, if this is possible, with the sidewalk. So I don't know what other towns do, but Grafton isn't a sidewalk town right now, clearly. But to Doreen's point, in 30 years, we're going to be a sidewalk town. So how do we get from here to there? Like, how do we get that data that we need to be able to, prioritize funding, and implementation of maintenance and new sidewalks. So I don't know whether that's hiring out, an outside consultant to actually do that work. That made it real easy for us to fund when it came to the roads, because we had, sort of clearly articulated data to go on to say, look, if we don't put a little bit of additional funding into the roads, it's going to cost us a lot more in the long term, because our roads are going to sort of fall off the cliff in terms of maintenance. We're going to have to completely rebuild them from the subsurface up. That's going to be really expensive. So we don't want to do that. So I guess that's where my mind is. I'd like to see more of a systemic program. So I don't know how we do that, but maybe look around to see what other towns do and how they got from where Grafton is right now to where kind of, we want to be.
Ms. Roy?
So I just wanted to say what Mr. Opton just said. I can hear you, Mr. Canoyer, loud and clear. You're asking for direction, and I personally would like you to start with Millbury Street. That's the number one example that gets brought up every time the sidewalks discussion gets brought up, is why can't we do that stretch? And if we have the funding, that sounds like the one you should put all of your focus on, is figuring that out, where the funding is, and knock that off while you're creating the comprehensive prioritized list of other potential projects. That's just my suggestion. I don't know if the rest of the board feels that way, but I would say start there.
All right, Mr. Prisby.
Just one more thing. I'm sorry. I do want to, just say thank you to Paul and Chris for the presentation. Like Matt said, this is in no way directed at you guys. I've been on this board for 2.5 years now, and I take full ownership of the fact that we haven't pushed sidewalks as hard as we should have, and the reason we didn't was for the very reasons you said, Paul. Like, look, we've got 1 million crumbling roads, we've got X amount of dollars, and this is what people said that they wanted to do with it way back in 2014 when we said we were deficient on roads, and still we're hearing about the roads. I mean, I'm sure you hear about the roads every single day. So. This is just sort of a change in focus to finally say from the board, this needs to be a long-term focus, as Doreen said, because in the future, as Grafton continues to grow, holistically, we're going to be looking at a whole other host of problems, from school transportation to health of residents, to be able to walk around. And the challenges presented by what we're doing are just paramount in this area. So, Chris, your challenge is going to be, okay, well, we've got a town that's committed to open space, which means we have pockets of development spaced out around town, Paul, like you said, where these developments don't connect to each other by sidewalk. So if you want sidewalks, you're going to have some sidewalks in some neighborhoods that kind of go nowhere, if that's the strategy that you want to pursue. So a lot of that stuff, you guys are right, it's going to take a lot of thinking and a lot of planning to determine where best to put the precious tax dollar that everybody will complain that we spend. I think what we're saying here tonight and what I've heard is, okay, let's just do a little bit of both. Let's talk about the things that we know we need, like Millbury Street, that I guess have already been funded. And then in the longer term, talk about what makes sense through these plans. But let's also, continue to follow up, because my only problem is I've seen this board 1 million times talk about, okay, we're going to plan some more, we're going to plan some more, we're going to plan some more. And then, the planning is as far as it goes, or worse, the talking about the planning is as far as it goes. So I think we need to do a little bit better this time around.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Canoyer.
I'll just, I'll close my comments just, with one thing that I said to Carter the other day, and I said to Tim prior to that. We'll do whatever you want us to, whatever you point us in that direction. If we're marching, we're not fighting. So I'll go that way. It's just, if we're going to go in this direction, that's fine. You needed to be told that's the direction you guys want to move, and that's the way we'll move. Again, back to the inventory we did in 2020. That's the start of what, in some of those slides that Chris had. That's a new inventory. That say it's a draft. It's the first inventory that we've ever had of the sidewalks. And that's really, to Matt's point, how other communities have their sidewalk program. And that's step one, is inventorying what we currently have. Brian and I started vetting out some of it a few weeks ago. Again, it just takes time with everything else we've got going on. So that's step one, get this proofed, and then move on from there with the consultant. So we're slowly working in that direction.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it. Chris, thank you very much for coming out tonight. Appreciate it. I would thank the board too for the comments, Carter, for facilitating. I appreciate it very much. And we'll come up with, I'll work with Mr. Terenzini on working up next steps and some sort of schedule to bring this back to the board sooner rather than later. So he doesn't, to Mr. Frisbee's point and Ms. Roy's point, it doesn't just fall off and we spent an hour and 15 minutes tonight talking about something that we don't follow up with. All right. Thank you. Have a good night. All right. I Hi, welcome, Ginny. How you doing? Thanks for sticking with us here and us talking about sidewalks. Exciting times in Grafton. Thank you for sticking around. Let me just pull up my next. So next up on our agenda, we are discussing cannabis status regarding community host agreements and licensures. So tonight we have Ms. Ginny Kramer, Town Council, with us, as well as Mr. Terenzini providing some guidance on this. I know the board over the course of several weeks have had some questions come up about this, and this is a discussion allow the board to ask some questions and then potentially see or discuss what possible actions that we may consider taking in the future. I don't know. We'll see where this goes tonight. But I wanted to open this up to Mr. Terenzini, and we'll start with you, and then we'll open it up to Ms. Kramer from a memo that she wrote to us, and she can go through that, and then we'll have the board ask some questions. Does that work? Great, thanks. Okay.
So very quickly, you had brought up some concerns, both about the overall first across the finish line policy that you had developed. And then where were projects and what, if anything, could we be doing to help facilitate a more rapid movement on those, given their positive revenue impacts? So we put together a memorandum, circulated it to a number of people, tried to put together all of the questions that we thought would be of import in you having that discussion. We've provided you that memo, and we've provided you with a status report on the 4 entities that currently hold HCAs. We do have some supplemental information from the building inspector's office when you get to that small spreadsheet. But I think the best thing to do, perhaps, Mr. Chairman, if the board feels that my memorandum laid out the questions that were in their mind, perhaps we could just have Ms. Kramer go through those questions and responses, and then the board can work their way from there. And I can close out with a status of the 4 HCAs, if that makes some sense to you.
That works fine for me. Any objections from the board? Okay. All right, thank you. Good evening, Ms. Kramer. How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Good, thank you.
So, I just want to start by saying that, obviously this is a whole new rodeo that the Commonwealth was introduced to. And like the, reminiscent of the COVID response from the state, is kind of, to have 351 cities and towns make up how they're going to deal with the various issues that were bound to arrive. And I actually had a long conversation with the general counsel to the Cannabis Control Commission, with whom I worked at the Attorney General's office. Back in the day, I know her personally, and there's just a lot of different moving parts. So when this issue came up, the direction of the board was that, they wanted to encourage these businesses to locate in Grafton, not like some towns that, did not want to encourage them to locate in their towns. And in light of that, the feeling of the board was that we don't want to throw up barriers for businesses to locate here, because we want the tax revenue and we're business friendly, and it was just the philosophy of the board. So in light of that, over several meetings with the administration, the town planner, and conversations with the state, which ended up in, figure it out, we'll kind of let you know if you do something wrong, which has been the state's response with respect to all matters COVID. We had a number of meetings and talked to a number of stakeholders, and the feeling was, there are 2 points at which the state comes to the town to ask for the status of an applicant. One is to get out of the gate, they have to have a host community agreement. And the second is to get a provisional license, you have to have certification from the town that they're in compliance with all local bylaws. So given the fact that town meeting decided to impose a limit of a limit of the number of entities that could locate in the state, the choice was either to cut off applicants at the front end or cut them off at the back end. And if you cut them off at the front end, there are 1,000,001 reasons that somebody who wanted to pursue a recreational marijuana establishment in Grafton would eventually be unable to pursue such a thing. And so the feeling was there was no margin for the town in cutting them off at the front end, because if if the third one or fourth one in the door, you said, no, we're not giving you a host community agreement because we already are filled up, then, one or all of the first ones through the gate could fold because they didn't pass, background checks, because they didn't have the correct, security, because they, couldn't get the financing. I mean, there are 101 reasons why it would fall through. And then, would the surrounding towns be saturated, and would it be not attractive to anybody to want to locate in Grafton if there were, there are few in Worcester, there's one in Millbury, there's one, in Shrewsbury, or however it pans out. So, in view of the legal vacuum of guidance, it's certainly consistent with the law to allow additional host community agreements to be executed and then see how it all shakes out. And that way the town isn't deprived of an applicant that goes the distance. So that was the balance that was struck, but it certainly was never meant to be, and I, from some of the questions, it kind of suggested that this was, somehow a policy of the town, or somehow something that tied the board's hands. I mean, the board has always been, in the driver's seat with respect to executing these agreements or not executing these agreements, and, can accept or reject this advice just like it can accept or reject any advice at any time. It's just advice. So that was, I guess, accepted by the board at that time, and now is being re-examined, which is completely fine and appropriate to do. But it is, historically, what has happened, and now, the process is a little further along. There is a case in the SJC concerning the city of Salem. The lower court upheld the local municipality's decision with respect to picking and choosing. And, I expect that to be upheld at the SJC, but I don't have any, special knowledge about how that case is going to go. So, this law is evolving. We always knew it was going to be. There's going to be a whole body of law in 10 years that's going to provide guidance. But at the moment, there's, precious little guidance for municipalities, and it's all, there's a lot of guesswork. So that's kind of where we are.
Thank you. All right. We want to open it up. Any questions from the board with regards to that memo? We'll go with Mr. Prisby first, followed up by Mr. Fausto. Thank you.
Okay, so I think the one main concern that I have right now, Jeannie, is I don't feel like we're very much in the driver's seat. We started talking to applicants for HCAs 2 years ago, and our policy at the time, I very much recall, was that we were going to, as you put it, weed people out at the back end of the process, because essentially at the time we were first come, first serve. And what we didn't want to do was have two people walk in the door and, like you said, not be able to carry the ball all the way through. Eventually, we gave out 4 HCAs. And I think the concern now is we're 2 years into it. Everybody that came before us said that they had the money, it was going to be 9 months, and we'd be open, whatever, within a year. And I know that because I remember having discussions about the revenue projections. And again, this year, we projected a bunch of revenue based on open recreational marijuana retail establishments, and it hasn't happened. Now I see from our packet today that Resonate is estimating a possible opening in June of 2021, which means they haven't done anything in a year. All right. So the problem that I have is what I'm seeing in the market, which is a lot of people squatting on HCAs and going and getting the provisionals and making the provisionals a saleable commodity. And that's a portion of their business plan. And we've fallen victim to that because as I read our HCA, we don't necessarily have an out without litigation. So we've got a problem there. The problem is compounded when we start reading the statute to say that a provisional license is the end of the process by which we are going to stop accepting either new HCA applications, or we're going to tell the CCC that the new applications aren't qualified because they don't comply with our bylaws. Meanwhile, the 2 that have got the provisionals are apparently not doing anything and are just sitting there again with this possible ready market for their provisional, so those guys can make some money. So Grafton, it seems to me, is getting a little bit played right here. And I've got 2 questions. One is how on earth we can change our approach now as we sit here today to get one of these places to open and come up with some leverage to get them there. And number 2, whether or not we can move to revoke an HCA if someone's just going to sit on it. Because as Carter points out in his memo, it's like if you had a liquor license and you didn't open a restaurant, we could eventually say to you, all right, well, you haven't sold in 6 months. What are you doing? You're sitting on your liquor license. We might revoke it. Here, there's no process for that, but I'm willing to try and invent one, to be candid with you, because I don't take at face value any more of the representations of the people that came before us and said that they were ready, willing, and able to open. I think they're business people. I think that they are leveraging the situation for their maximum benefit. Maybe that'll involve opening a recreational shop in Grafton, but maybe it won't. And I, for one, am no longer willing to sit by and just sort of wait. I'm a little disappointed by some of the memo, I'll tell you, because it's a lot of like this, we're not required to communicate to the CCC. We're not required to do anything to the applicant. No more of this. That was the old way of thinking, okay? I want to be proactive about getting one of these shops open. I can't assume that people have watched our meetings, and I can't assume that the CCC has any idea where Grafton even is on a map. Frankly, I don't think that they do, okay? We need to be aggressive with reaching out to the CCC and saying, this is what we're thinking. This is what our bylaw says. I know you're only 5 people in a folding table all working from home now, but we've got an issue here where we've got 4 people or 4 entities that have all got HCAs. Every single one of them could potentially be an income source for us. And right now, or the past thinking was, well, they're in line. Nobody's in line. There's no line. I want a store open. I don't care who it is. I want them to open, and I want them to open as soon as possible because we promised the town this revenue and a couple different budget projections. So we need to shift our focus from being passive to being a little more aggressive. And I'm wondering, do we change at this point our process for issuing HCAs? Do we redraft the HCA if we do issue any more to say there's a sunset provision on this? Can we do that? You know, these are the sorts of things that I want to hear to get us to just move the ball down the field a little bit and stop being so at the whim of whoever pulled these before.
Thank you. Who had their hand up next? Mr. Fazio? Right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Mr. Prisby covered a lot. So I will just, there's a couple things that he mentioned, and it really, again, all summarizes nicely into my one question, which is, has to deal with leverage. Do we have any leverage? And I was thinking, to move to revoke any current HCAs, is there some sort of sunset policy that we can put, or bylaw that we can put on an HCA? Because as was stated, you know, we've had these budget projections. We're just trying to get a business open. And so to me, an approach to a change approach in order to get leverage would be to put some set of sunset provision in our HCAs. And my second comment or question was regarding if Carter had any additional. We mentioned the 4 HCAs currently, the status, just what was written in the memo, or would you like to speak a little more on that? Because I think it is important to talk about where we are currently too.
I do have an update, Mr. Chairman, if subject to your pleasure.
Sure, please.
So the MJ's Market has informed us that they expect to submit their plans for review on December 21, a little bit earlier than what we had in the memorandum. We speak of 4 HCAs and 4 retail, but Nature's Remedy, I just want to remind people that the note per the planning board, they actually withdrew their retail side of things there. Noble Manna has not made any progress on that building permit. Technically, it's expired and should actually be revoked. The building inspector has not done that as a courtesy to the folks, but that permit is approaching 1 year old. They're technically good for 6 months, and you're supposed to commence and diligently prosecute the work. There's Resonite, we found when we went back in, did have a building permit that's valid, but it was for selective demo only. If I might, Mr. Chairman, my concern here is that this has been painted as a first across the finish line, but it's really not. It's the first 2 who've applied to be at the starting line, because the process is you execute an HCA, they then submit their documents for provisional licensing. And as part of that process, even before they get their provisional license, the town gets this document of, are they in compliance? And when you get to 2, the advice is after 2, you say no. So you don't even know that they have a provisional license at that point in time. So that's my concern here.
All right, thank you. Ms. Roy.
I guess my question is, why do you have to stop approving them after 2 provisional licenses? Because a provisional license does not guarantee they will open up in Grafton at all. It does not guarantee that they won't go get an HC in another community and take that provisional license with them. When I was reading that form and it's asking if they're in compliance, I read that as until there's 2 RMEs open, everybody's still in compliance, because nothing's going to prevent another provisional license from opening it. You know what I mean? It's until the RMEs are open. Now they won't be in compliance. But a provisional license is not guaranteeing anything, actually. And it was my understanding, as I went to all those meetings when they signed the HCAs, the race to the finish line sense, they were all signed within weeks of each other. It really was this sense of, you got to get your building up, and it's really going to be a gamble which building got approved with the CCC. You could be putting in a lot of your own capital to get this done, and you might not win. But that's on the risk of opening a business, not the town, right?
There's a question there from Ms. Roy. Did Ms. Kramer or Mr. Terenzini want to try to answer that for her? Sure, Mr. Terenzini.
Well, I don't know if I can truly answer it. I mean, the advice was that you would respond to the CCC at the time they sent this form out. And that I understand. So you've done that with the first two. So the question really becomes, what constitutes an establishment? That really is at what the bylaw says you can have two establishments. So what constitutes one? The first two that apply to be to get provisional licensing, the first two that get permanent licensing, the first two that get certificates of occupancy, and then they unlock the door and have a sale. Meanwhile, you go down the street and you tell the third one who's got construction underway, and you say, oh, geez, you might as well stop right now because Joe down the street just unlocked his doors. He's now number two, and we only allow two establishments. So I think that to me, as I look through this, and I understand the challenge that Ms. Kramer faced in trying to draft some guidance for you, is it all rests to me on what is an establishment, because there is no local license that you issue. It's not like the liquor licenses.
Ms. Kramer, did you want to address that too before we go to Mr. Alford's
I want to say that, the problem, and I totally understand what you're saying, Carter. I mean, the problem is there's no next opportunity for the town to weigh in. So the fact of the matter is that the town meeting has capped you at two establishments. And I guess, maybe the last opportunity is that the building department would say, no, we can't issue you a certificate of occupancy because we have two open and selling. But then that's even worse for the establishments to not know until the very last minute. I mean, that's almost, so it just, again, I think, the issue here is that there's a lot of unforeseen things when you start up a whole new industry, and this legislators in the State House weren't thinking about this from the local level. And when they gave the towns and, cities and towns the authority to limit the number of establishments, nobody was thinking about, how and when those limitations would be enforced. And, so it comes up and you ask the question and no one knows. So it just, it's tough to say. So I don't know. If Carter has a thought on how.
Well, I understand the challenge because the legislation actually prohibits beyond the capping of how many establishments can you have. You can't create a separate a cast of licensure above and beyond the triple Cs. You can't say, we're only going to have two establishments and then create a, $500 a year cannabis RME license, where if they can't get one of them, that they know they don't have it. So I don't know the answer. That's beyond my level. I stopped playing lawyer at that level, which I know Ms. Kramer's probably thankful for. But that truly is the question. What is an establishment, and at what point do you pull that trigger? Early on, when there's no great incentive for people to keep going because they have their provisional, or at the very last minute after they've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars and Mr. Berger says, I'd love to issue the certificate of occupancy, but I can't because of this cap on establishments. I don't have an answer to that question.
In that vein, because the limitation is not a zoning contained within the zoning bylaws, that would be fraught with peril for the building inspector to try to enforce a local bylaw. It's not clear, that's a basis for him to not issue a certificate of occupancy. So, then by the time, they've invested that much money, that's automatic litigation by the disappointed suitor who doesn't get their certificate of occupancy. So,
All right, thank you. Before we go, Mr. Hoffman, you had your hand up next before we had Ms. Kramer and Mr. Terenzini respond, and then followed up by Mr. Frisbee and Ms. Roy.
So I feel like in terms of, we were talking about leverage earlier. The most leverage that the town can get is to say that, it's the occupancy permit. It's an open business. When we talk about race to the finish, that's what we're talking about. That's been the stated position of the town all along. And I'd love to hear more about why that would be fraught with lawsuits in terms of burgers and inability to not be able to issue an occupancy permit based on the fact that we've got a bylaw in town that says that we can only have 2 RMEs. To tie our relationship and our communication with the state to the licenses that we allow so early in the process, it seems like it really hamstrings the town in terms of creating that competitive entrepreneurial environment that we want. It actually was in the memo that said essentially it's at the risk of the business to continue with their investments and their progress. And you can't tell me that these businesses aren't keeping an eye on what the other businesses are doing. They are. They absolutely are. So it's like incumbent upon the business owners to assess the risk and to move forward with their developments as they weigh the risks and benefits of continuing along with those things. And I really think it would be a huge disbenefit to the town to move forward, cutting off businesses so early in the process to say that 2 provisional licenses that can sit there forever constitutes our 2, and we're not going to allow any other businesses to be in compliance, even though we don't have any open businesses yet. That just, I don't know. The common sense part of me says that doesn't add up. So,
I mean, to that, I would offer that, I've never been a business person, and it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong, based upon how this is all played out, but it seems to me that by the time you get to the provisional license stage, you would have invested enough that you wouldn't want to just sit on the sidelines. And maybe that's incorrect. And, because I didn't know any of what Ed said about the ones who have their provisionals and for whatever reason aren't moving forward with the process. But that's not easy to achieve a provisional license. So I think the thought back in, whenever it was that by the time you did all that, you were committed to the location, you were committed to the business. And I guess if that has turned out not to be the case, that's not something that I evaluated for purposes of the memo that I wrote. It wasn't a question that was put to me, but if that's how it's actually played out, that's a little bit different than my understanding was, in writing my memo.
My impression is the barriers to entry for provisional license are pretty low. When you look at the end-to-end development of a cannabis RME business, when you get to operational, it's much higher. It's not to trivialize the amount of investment and time and resource that they put into the provisional license and putting together that package, but the bar is pretty low and the investment's pretty low at that stage. And I think it's much, much higher when I guess what I'm saying is I don't think that, and I think this is bearing out in Grafton. What we're seeing is that they sort of get to that first milestone, and then there isn't a lot of incentive in Grafton to move to the next milestone, which is that operational license. And that's the environment that we want to create.
Okay, so that's, I mean, I guess, my understanding of the issue was, maybe re-examining whether we cut off the process too soon. And what I'm hearing is we didn't cut off the process soon enough, or the opposite of that. In other words, it's not whether we should refuse to execute another HCA because we already have two. It's whether we should give the CCC information that the establishment, the applicant, is in compliance with the local law, even though we have more than two already. And that's the question that you need to have answered is, can we continue and say, give the green light to the number 3 and number 4, because they still might not pan out even after receiving their provisional license.
Yep.
All right. I'm sorry. Who had their hand up after Jonathan, Mr. Prisby, and then followed, I think, with Ms. Wood? Thank you.
So I have two questions. The first is, when did we decide that we were no longer going to work with applicants after provisional licenses had been given out? Because we never had that conversation as a board. Do you know, Jenny?
No, I mean, post advise. I mean, again, the problem here is that there are 2 points where, the town has asked for input, or, right at the beginning, and then, right before the award of the provisional, or in connection with the award of the provisional. So those were the 2 points we examined as points at which, because as Carter said, there is not a local license that gets issued. So, under the law as written by the legislature, after that, nobody's asking the town to weigh in. I mean, we didn't look into whether the question of whether the building inspector could refuse to issue a certificate of occupancy. I mean, that's like, as we all know, anybody who, has ever moved or purchased a home or whatever, that's like while you're standing there with your suitcases on the front step. So that wasn't even something that we considered. So
no, and I appreciate that, because reading a lot of what's been written by other lawyers who do a lot of this stuff, they'll confirm that. The process, as it turns out, was there was going to be some initial input from the community to begin with when you accept the HCA or when you give one out. And then before provisional license is issued, the CCC will confirm with the community that the institution is in compliance with local bylaws, which is fine. But the way it was presented to the board was we were going to vet these on the back end. We weren't going to do it on the front end. And by the back end, I can say it was my understanding that we meant when the place was ready to open its doors. Okay. Inadvertently, probably a situation was created that, and probably because the state sometimes doesn't appreciate municipal issues, a situation was created where we now have this sort of purgatory for applicants who have gotten an HCA, who have gotten to the provisional phase, and now are sort of weighing it out. Do they want to invest the resources in capital? Really, that's what it is. It's demolition of an existing building, or it's entering into a lease with a perfect location, usually a former bank or something like that, that could have the security necessary to be able to pass the CCC's final muster for a license. And the way we're doing it now, all the risk is on the municipality. We've taken the risk in giving these things out. There's no risk on Resonate right now. There's no risk on Nature's Remedy. They don't need to open this year. They might not need to ever open. They can sit and wait, because a couple of these guys have other facilities. They're making money. This is an asset for them. So what I'm saying is, in as much as, and I appreciate what you're saying about it might be worse for the applicant because it creates this uncertainty, that's their problem. That's their problem. My problem is I got a community full of people that need money. I don't care about Resonate right now. I don't care about Nature's Remedy. I don't care about Noble Mana. God bless you guys. Go open your business and make a lot of money. My problem is we were told 2 years ago this would take a year, and now it's a year past that, and we're nowhere closer to where we were before. So we're bearing all the risk under this arrangement. The state doesn't care, and neither do the applicants. So how do we get out of that? And I guess the question, I have a series of questions here that I think we need to work out answers to. Number one, can we move to revoke HCAs based on non-performance? And, it's a contract like any other contract. The representations made to us in public view were that they were going to get this done, and they haven't. And maybe it's not even that important to revoke them because we can always give out other ones if the assumption is we're going to push people past the finish line toward final licensure and not merely provisional licensure. Number two, should we adopt a policy of not issuing further HCAs? Maybe the back end approach isn't working for us. Maybe we need to adopt a more front end approach at this point. And if we're not doing that, do we amend the HCAs to include a sunset provision after 12 months? And I know the CCC has their own, but I don't know how well that's being enforced. Again, it seems like you can get to the provisional by doing 2 community outreach programs that hardly anyone goes to except former boards of selectmen members who go to one, and then providing some plans. And the final question is, how can we build a relationship with the CCC to ensure that after our second store opens, the other ones that we've given HCAs to don't also open? Because that was an important part of the bylaw discussion that we entered into. If we're giving it HCAs, and as Carter points out, you can build a restaurant. I don't have to give you a liquor license, except that if they take the next step and go to the CCC, does the CCC know to come back to us and say, okay, is this copacetic with your bylaws? Again, we all know, as a lawyer, I know, and I'm sure you do too, there is a framework set up for interplay with a regulatory agency. Sometimes, if you just build a relationship with them, you can communicate your needs, and that regulatory agency will understand them. It doesn't necessarily, I don't think, need to be that our last point of input is at the provisional licensure stage. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm totally wrong about that. But at the very least, I think it would behoove us to establish some relationship with the CCC to be able to tell them, look, we've given out 4 of these. We can only have 2 open. We want to incentivize them to open. So the first 2 that you get, grant licenses to. The third one, no. The fourth one, no. Am I making sense at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, as I said, because I have, I worked with the general counsel of the CCC. I spoke to her for about an hour about this. And I mean, and again, I mean, I understood the questions put to me to be, should we limit HCAs on the front end, not should we, wait till further in the process? I mean, it never even occurred to either one of us that there was, a point C at which these could be cut off. So I didn't ask that question, but in the hour that we discussed this and discussed what other communities are doing, and I don't want to just, dump on the CCC because they are, confined by the law and the regulations promulgated thereunder. So they can't just, make up advice that, to give out to municipalities. It's not based in the law or the regulations. So, it was really just a very intense discussion about, cutting it off at 2 HCAs or cutting it off at 2 when they come back to the town to say, are they in compliance with all the bylaws? There was no even, thought that there was a point C or a third point that the town could do that. So, the HCAs were written by the contract expert in the former iteration of my firm, which is Mead, Tallerman, and Costa, which is, the iteration of the firm I was in when this law passed. And so these were HCAs that were, vetted and written by a contract expert and used across, I don't remember how many municipalities we represented at the time. But, obviously, this is a few years down the road, and there's a lot has changed. There's more information. I mean, there's things that were not anticipated. So I think it's completely reasonable to reopen negotiations, as you said, based on non-performance. If there are entities out there that are holding them as an asset and hindering down from achieving its goal of opening an RME within the town. So I mean, I think that it wasn't anticipated that that's how the market would work. But now that we know that it is, and if there are entities out there who are holding the HCAs and a provisional license and still not marching forward to get to opening day, then that's something that can be and should be re-examined, because under general tenets of contract law, it's they're preventing the town from getting the benefit of the bargain that they struck way back when. So it's kind of like move forward or exit stage left. And
yeah, I agree with that. And obviously, like you said, this wasn't something that we foresaw. But that's how, look, people are entrepreneurs and they want to make money. And there were some good intentions with this law, but there are also some consequences. And one of the consequences is there are gaps between getting an HCA and opening up a place. There are funding issues for a lot of these people that are looking to open these businesses. And you combine those two things, and that means there's opportunity there for people to make some money in ways that maybe we didn't envision. And I suspect that's what's happening now. And we have to figure out how we're going to respond. I haven't seen a single case out there where somebody or a municipality has revoked an HCA. So this would be new, and we would be sort of pushing the boundary maybe here, but we need to, I think. I think we need to be aggressive with our applicants and say, look, you came in, you gave us a great dog and pony show. There were slides, there were pictures, everybody had the right thing to say, but now it's 2 years later, and we've missed out on revenue, and we're upset about it. So what can we do to move this along at the very least?
If I may add one thing before we go to the next question, one of the things that I recall in being part of those town meetings and hearing people's concerns about opening up beyond the two that we have now for Operation in Grafton was that if we get to, then let's consider the third or the fourth one if we have that much of an interest. So in my opinion, that, can, an establishment, meet the criteria for Operation in Grafton, great, first across the finish line. And then when we get to two, then, hey, we can ask those companies like, hey, you should, great, you got a provisional license here, you want to invest in Grafton, then, get the bylaw changed, propose town meeting to make an amendment to it to increase it. So I think there is an avenue for other organizations to, go down that road and be a part of Grafton's business community, because this one thing is really defined by the public about how many establishments can be in operation in our town. Am I oversimplifying that? Is that like a reasonable approach to, I think, a broader question about, hey, we shouldn't restrict ourselves technically to just signing 2 HCAs and then they get sit on it and nothing happens. But if someone else wants to come in and be like, hey, I'm ready to start doing something like yesterday, then why should we as a town prohibit that business development from occurring? I guess you can kind of flip side and look at that, Ginny, and I know this is really more of a political decision and not really a legal one, but that kind of would make us business unfriendly in that sense too. So I think that, hey, the two that get across the finish line first, if we have more in the pipeline that are, willing to open up in Grafton, they've got a plan, they want to present, then so be it. If they can't get it done in a timely manner that someone else can get it done sooner, then I guess my question to the board is, why should we prohibit and wait, right? And then to what detriment is that to us? From what I'm hearing from Mr. Prisby, it's a financial one, right? The second one is, hey, a majority of the public wanted to have a retail establishment in Grafton. They want that locality. They want that option to shop locally in Grafton. And right now, because we don't even have one open, I'll tell you right now, I am more inclined to see somebody open sooner rather than later. And if those people who can't get to that finish line, sooner than the others, then let's propose that to the town and have them partner with us to say, hey, let's expand it to 3 or 4, whatever the number needs to be. I just wanted to, I don't get to comment very much early on. I'm usually chairing, so this is my one opportunity. So I apologize to the other board members if I cut them off. Did someone else have their hand up after Mr. Prisby? Thanks, Ms. Wright. Sorry.
So this question is on one of the sheets in the packet that was compiled by John Allen. So Mr. Terenzini, I don't know, or maybe Ms. Kramer, if you might have the answer to this, but one of the retail establishments, Resonate, is stating they received a letter from town council saying that they are one of the 2. Now, it does say town council said they did not issue such a letter. Where did that stand? How did they get that impression? How did we get there? Does anybody have information about that?
I believe that they are confused in their statement, in that when a applicant has completed their community meeting and obtained their HCA, they can then file an application for a provisional license. Ms. Kramer provided the requirements for that. And I wouldn't call them particularly onerous. And then if you look at the package, page 37 of 38 that I gave you, you're going to see a inquiry comes out to the town from the CCC. Are they in compliance with municipal bylaws or ordinances? And for the first 2, we clicked, or Mr. McInerney at the time clicked yes, because they were the first 2, and you allow 2 establishments. And I believe that Resonate has confused this so-called letter with this form. Now, should we receive a 3rd one, under the prior guidance, we would but fill out no, that they're not, because we have 2 establishments. The question becomes, in my mind, setting aside revocation, which I think is a problem, frankly, because there's not a lot of requirements in here for performance. The requirement for performance is pay us the money, file the report, and don't lose your license from CCC, and stay in business. Those are the only, and even then you'd have to look further at it. So the question becomes, in my mind, when that 3rd one comes in, if we said, yes, they're in compliance, how do you then control them from actually opening? That's the certificate of occupancy question, because there is no further check back from the CCC. That's it. That's the touch point. I don't know, if Ms. Kramer has any thoughts on that, but I see that as the challenge. I go back to what constitutes an establishment, and at what point can you control that? And setting everything else aside, I think that the concerns that you have really rest on that point. 2 points. What is an establishment, and how do you impose your local control on that?
Mr. Terenzini, if I may add, I'm looking at the Mass Reg right in front of me that talks about provisional licensing. And I think this one paragraph right here, I just want to read it out loud for the board, just so you all can hear it. So I'm reading this from section 500-103, licensure and renewal. 1, provisional license. On selection by the commission, an applicant shall submit the required license fee and subsequently be issued a provisional license to develop a marijuana establishment. I want to stop right there. So right there, by that very definition, they're talking about developing a marijuana establishment. There is no marijuana establishment with a provisional, okay? So by that logic alone, okay, they're talking about, setting one up. In the name of such entity, such provisional license shall be subject to reasonable conditions specified by the commission, if any, and I can go on. But I think from a definition perspective, does everyone agree that, the way that I'm interpreting this, and I don't know if legal wants to weigh in on this as well, but I mean, when you're saying this is a provisional license is to develop a marijuana establishment, it's not defining that they are an establishment.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. But again, as Carter just said, there's no further check-in. So, I feel like the solution here, as is often the case, is not a legal solution. Perhaps, the better road to take would be for the town administrator to pick up the phone and, call these entities and say, what's going on? Because, we have issued for or executed for host community agreements. You guys have your provisional licenses, but it appears that you're doing nothing further from that standpoint. So the board is interested in knowing how to move forward with entities that, do want to move forward. And, because, the legal landscape is extremely unclear. I mean, as I, say, anybody can sue anytime, anytime for any reason or for no reason. Here, I think if you got all the way to, buttoning everything down, you have your security detail, you have your supplier, you have your everything, and you want your certificate of occupancy, and the town says, no, sorry, we have two. You're gonna buy a lawsuit. Could you? There's all kinds of defenses to that, of course, but isn't it better to put these people on notice that this isn't okay? I mean, this wasn't the expectation. You came in with the slideshow. You came in with the dogs and the ponies. You told us this. We projected the revenue, and now we're still sitting here empty-handed. Often the legal process is the absolute worst way to deal with any problem, right? It's expensive, it's uncertain, and, it takes a really long time. So, what other processes could be started with much less, fanfare, rules, and, expense to the town to understand where these entities are coming from, why they're not moving forward, and if they'll step aside if that's the case, and put some pressure on in that manner.
Mr. Fazio, then Ms. Roy.
Thanks. Just a quick question. So just to clarify, Ginny, there's nothing prohibiting us as a town for adding an additional checkpoint, let's say, past a provisional license, is there? So there, we're talking about things like what is an establishment? So can this board choose between occupancy license or provisional license and occupancy license? Can we put together another checkpoint and decide as a board, like, yeah, once you get to this point, or if you haven't made it to this point by this date, there's a sunset provision. Is there anything prohibiting us from doing that?
There's nothing prohibiting you from signing off on, the third and the fourth inquiry by the CCC as is this establishment in compliance with, or is this applicant in compliance with local bylaws? Because we can make the argument, we don't have two marijuana establishments. So therefore, yeah, they can comply. They're in compliance right now. But I'm just saying that, then if you get three that get to the point of filing, an application for a certificate of occupancy by the building inspector, we're going to probably have a problem. So I just think that in conjunction with taking that step of saying to the CCC, yeah, there's no problem here yet, there should also be some, administrative or, process by which the town, notifies these entities. And, I'm happy to do it in the context of the host community agreements in terms of non-performance. But I agree with what Carter said about, the performance required isn't that by 6 months after execution, you have this, 12 months after execution, you have this. I mean, those provisions are not in the host community agreement. And I think the reason is because the assumption was anyone who was going to do that was going to be motivated by other forces besides the terms of the contract to get their facility opened. And, it's turned out that maybe that's not necessarily the case. So, I think it's better to work with, through Carter, or the planning department or whatever, pick up the phone and say, where are you guys? We had this agreement, you guys are got what you needed from us. And now, what's happening, and, try to figure out from that standpoint, who's serious and who's not. And that's going to be, much less expensive and hopefully more fruitful and more, and not take 5 or 6 years to figure out who won and who lost. So I just think that, lawsuits and litigation is a last resort option, and it's often the worst way to solve any given problem. So I wouldn't, shy away from, defending the town, of course, but I think it's better to think, how can we avoid getting to that point? Because then it's in some judge's hands in the Superior Court, and you pay a whole lot of money and you have no idea, how it's going to turn out in the end.
Ms. Roy, then Mr. Hoffman.
So Ms. Kramer just kind of answered my question. My question was going to be to Mr. Terenzini about if you were to check the not in compliance box, what would the rationale be? But as she just said, you really couldn't because there aren't any establishments open. So go ahead and check the remaining ones, how many ever come in front of your desk until we have 2 open. My question is now shifted to what kind of lawsuit would we face for not issuing an occupancy permit to an establishment that knowingly entered into a race? We said to every single one of these HCAs when they were issued that this is a race. You're in a race. At what point do we take that pressure off from them? They're looking at the other competitors. They see where they are in the race. I don't understand how not issuing an occupancy permit causes us any litigation. Ms. Kramer.
Was that I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Kramer.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, anybody can sue anybody anytime for any reason or for no reason. So
would that be a frivolous lawsuit coming after us by saying you didn't issue me an occupancy permit, I want millions of dollars? I mean, anyone can do anything at any time, but do they have a leg to stand on?
Well, I didn't look into that specific issue, but my concern would be that the certificate of occupancy is kind of like a checklist of, do you meet the building code? And this is not a building code provision. I mean, this is a local bylaw.
I'm sorry, Ms. Kramer, but occupancy permit is also meeting building and zoning codes.
Right, but this is not contained within the zoning code. It's a general bylaw.
It's a licensure, right? Thank you. All right.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, it's not supposed to be a discretionary decision by anybody in the building department. I mean, it's like, do you have your fire suppression system? Do you have your smoke detectors? Do you have do you meet your, all the requirements of the zoning bylaw and the building code? And it's not supposed to be anything other than that. So again, I didn't look into this issue, and perhaps there's some law on that, but I can't sit here today and say that would be a frivolous lawsuit, because by that point, again, and just given the equities of the situation, they're so far down the road that they're ready to unlock their front door, and there's a line of people waiting to purchase goods from them. It's supposed to be beyond like you just Bob Berger stands there and says, do they check all the boxes in the building and zoning code? And they arguably would. And so then could you deny them because of the general bylaw that sets forth the local limit? I can't really answer that question as I sit here, but I definitely can't say it would be a frivolous lawsuit that would be thrown out, at inception.
Who had their hand up next? Sorry, Mr. Austin, thank you.
So at this point in the process, none of the businesses are close to opening. I'm wondering, from our standpoint, would it help the town to clarify, and I'm not sure exactly how we would do this, but clarify what that policy is to say, the occupancy permit from the town standpoint is, equivalent to one of our licenses, right? Because I think that's what we're after. So is it a feasible approach for us to clarify that policy? And I don't know whether it's a bylaw amendment at town meeting where we signal this, we communicate with the applicants to say you've got a host community agreement. This is what we're after. These are the conditions that we've already expressed, but we're trying to codify, I guess, and also communicate with the CCC to say, look, this is the situation that Grafton's in. We've got more host agreements. We have potential, RME licenses to issue. Can we move forward with that type of approach to put ourselves in a better situation going forward so that we can kind of, it's not an inoculation, lawsuits will come and go, but to put ourselves on a position where we have pretty solid footing if that should happen.
Yeah, I think that we can, the Carter can call these entities up and say, what's going on? This was not what we bargained for way back when with the host community agreement. We're going to seek to amend the host community agreement to require you to take some steps or, take action because, we're actually, not a town that's avoiding the locating of an RME here. We want one. And, we negotiated in good faith with you. And now, we're not getting the benefit of our bargain and, and try to negotiate a requirement that they take some steps. And if they refuse, there's all kinds of options in terms of how to, and I can't, again, pretend to know why they would get to this point and not want to move forward or what, their thinking is as to why they're not. And maybe if they've, decided to, run out on day one and get host community agreements with 6 communities and now they've already opened 2 and they're all set. So they're just holding on to this one in case they feel like someday down the road there's more demand and they would, at this point rather fold and walk away, or they want to, stick up for their host community agreement in your community. I just think that that's really the way to approach the situation. And obviously Carter and I can, talk that through and try to figure out between the administrative and the legal, sticks and carrots that we have, how to approach that. But I think that's the proactive approach from where I'm sitting to get this, done, to get this moving forward.
Okay. Look, it may not even be that the business has made a decision that they don't move forward. Getting to the provisional license means that you can then start your planning process, right? And as we know, and as we've seen over and over, this may never get through planning at all. The facility just might not, for whatever reason, the finance might not come through, the, planning process may never complete. So even with businesses with good intentions,
Yeah.
these businesses might get stuck for years trying to open. So again, I guess I'll go back to, it seems to me to be a disbenefit to the town to cut, our licenses off at the provisional stage. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Call your state legislator. Tell them to rewrite the law.
Anyone else have any questions? Mr. Prisby.
Yeah, so what are we doing? I mean, we talked about this for an hour. My thing is, I want an RME open. And it seems to me the best way to get there is the next person that comes along and says, I'm ready to get my provisional, we check the box. And that's, the rest of it isn't our problem. Colleen's right. These guys knew when they were getting into it what their responsibilities were. And each one of them told us that they would have this thing open within 12 months. And now here we are, and nothing's close. So my understanding is the next one that comes in, we're checking the box. There's no line. No one's jumping a line. This isn't 1, 2, 3, 4. It's A, B, C, D. And they get in there. And you know what? If there's an F, that, as far as I know right now, F comes along and they can open within 6 months. God bless. Am I wrong? Is that what we're doing? Because I want to have some definitive, this is what we're doing sort of thing here tonight.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, Mr. Prisby, when I talked about that, I think something similar, right? And, about, if you recall, commentary on the town meeting floor, in the hearings and stuff, people had mentioned, let's start with this number. And if it gets to this number, we've got the 2, then we go to the town and ask for 3. Town didn't just want to arbitrarily give 3 or 4 or 5 for those up front and then say backfill them. They said,
but that's different than what I'm talking about.
I
I'm not talking
understand that,
about,
but I'm just
I'm
saying
not talking about the limit.
But that is I believe that is the method prescribed in this town, passed this bylaw about first across the finish line.
Okay, but that leaves us with the same problem. We're back to the beginning, Pete. We've got 4 of these things. When do we stop telling people no? When someone comes and says, the CCC has asked me to send this form in that says I comply with the bylaws. Are we checking the next form or not? I say yes, because nobody has opened one yet. When you go and you read chapter 94, hold on. When you go and you read chapter 94G, they use interchangeably the words establishment and operation. Operation is a verb and a noun. Okay. Operation means you are actually selling recreational marijuana. That is the way I view the intent of the statute. And that's frankly what I want for the town. I want someone to open their doors, and we're not getting there right now. So the next time someone comes with a form that says they comply, we're checking the box. Am I wrong?
I guess I was agreeing with you, and that's what I was saying. I agree with you. I was just stating something I mentioned earlier that I think aligns with what you're stating. Does anyone else have any input? I saw some hands go up. I'm sorry. Mr. Oppen and Mr. Fazio, and then Ms. Roy.
Yeah, sure. Look, I agree with what Ed's saying. I'd like to just agree tonight that the next time, provisional license comes along, we check yes, that they're in compliance. What I read from the memo was that the CCC seems to be fairly deferential to local municipalities in terms of interpreting their own local statute. And for us, that's the bylaw. And I think that gives us pretty good standing to make that determination. I guess I would like an opinion on if we do face lawsuits, because they could happen, is there something that we can do now to move forward with establishing this as an actual something that's codified, that we have more legal standing on should we face that lawsuit if it happens? I don't think it will, but of course, we want to put ourselves in that best position.
Mr. Fazio? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Terenzini, did you want to respond to that before we get to Mr. Fazio? Or do you want to let the other two board members?
I'm a touch nervous with the idea that the next one that comes along, we just sign it. If we don't have a game plan for what we do when they're trying to open, if we haven't at least thought that through. I don't have a sense that Noble Manor is in an imminent position of getting their paperwork in order such that we would get that form from the CCC. And we do have 60 days. The only trick in the 60 days is to make sure you do something in the 60 days, because the statute has defined a lack of response as, in effect, a positive response. I would like to, and this form that I gave you is, in fact, the result of a conversation with John Allen with each of these HCA holders. I would like to respectfully suggest that you give Ms. Kramer and I a little bit of time till your next workshop, knowing that we have this 60-day window. Even if it comes in tomorrow, we have 60 days to look at the HCA's to determine if in particular Section 11B provides us some leverage to reopen and to construct some form of obligatory action on their part where you could try to pressure them to act, and also gives her and I an opportunity to discuss what constitutes the opening of an establishment, because the statute doesn't provide any for local licensure and doesn't apply for this check back. I understand the board's desire to move forward as expeditiously as possible, but I would respectfully ask for a little bit more time to try to take what I've heard here tonight and work with Ms. Kramer to try to construct an approach that maximizes movement while minimizing risk.
Mr. Fazio?
Thank you. So I feel like we might be overcomplicating this a little bit, and we need revenue. So can we just get 4 of these businesses to come before the board, and we can also ask them what their intentions are? And, you know, half our board wasn't part of signing the HCAs, and, you know, it's an opportunity after 12 or 18 months to say, where are we at? Can you tell us what's been going on? What are your holdups? How can we help? And I think as a board, we can sort of establish from that point what direction everybody is going in, and we'll be able to make the determination that, you know, perhaps these people who gave us the best dog and pony show are not actually going to do anything. And then what do we do about that? You know, can we put them on the back burner, or can we add more provisional licenses without having to worry about a lawsuit? There's a lot of moving parts here, and because the state, you know, hasn't presented clear guidelines to us, I think, you know, you talked a few minutes ago about being proactive and just picking up the phone and having the conversation. And I think, you know, one step further would be to have them come in front of the board, and if they're serious about continuing, that they're gonna let us know that.
Ms. Roy?
I'd like to make 2 motions, if that's all right.
We're not taking action items tonight. If you want something that
But
we
it
want to take
sounds like-
action on, we'll do it at the next meeting.
It sounds like we're talking about things that we want to see action taken on.
Right, we're not taking any action tonight. I was pretty clear with Mr. Terenzini on that. I figure if we're going to take action, Colleen, that we would have a well-defined action with something that supports it that we're all going to understand and agree upon, maybe at the next meeting or the meeting after next. Otherwise, if there's things you want to consider moving forward as action items, you know, we'll definitely take them down tonight, and we'll figure out, you know, what is it that the board has to make a motion on to execute them. Does that sound fair?
Sure. Can I read you my 2 proposed motions for you to consider for action items on our next agenda?
Sure.
The first is to the board to approve that the town administrator complete the municipal response form from the CCC that any current HCAs are in compliance until 2 RMEs are open and operational. And the second would be that the board vote to limit any further HCAs issued in Grafton that may come before the board. We would only issue HCAs for applicants that have current provisional licenses in hand, because you can move those and transfer them from town to town. So rather than start someone, you know, early on in the process, if somebody comes to us tomorrow and say, hey, I'd like an HCA with you guys, I already have a provisional license, that we would consider signing that.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Wow. All right. Yeah, that was a pretty lengthy discussion, but I think it was well worth it. I think this board has a better understanding of just how ambiguous this law is in Massachusetts has. I appreciate all of the due diligence and the work that you have done and the outreach that you've made. If the board members don't have any other questions, I think we can move on. I think we've got 3 action items. One second, Mr. Fazio. I think we have 3 action items that we need to come back with. There's a consideration of bringing back the other members, but I'm not sure what comes first there, the chicken or the egg. But we can consider that. Was there anything else? Mr. Fazio, you did have your hand up. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You were starting to cover it, Mr. Chairman. I just want to know what our action items are and be clear on that, leaving this conversation. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And I know Ms. Kramer's taking lots of notes too. She'll keep me right.
Mr. Chairman, if Ms. Roy could forward her suggestions to us, that would allow us to put that into the package.
Yeah, I got the video here and the audio. Well, I figured we'd just take that and just go with that. If Ms. Roy, if that's acceptable to you, unless there's any clarifying that you want to make with something written, it's up to you. But we can take what was said in the video and just use
So
that.
my computer just froze. I heard Mr. Terenzini request that I send it over, and then you started to talk, but I didn't hear anything you said.
I didn't say anything important.
Great. Okay, so I'll send it over to you, Mr. Terenzini.
So basically I said, we've got the video and the audio of what was said by you. I mean, if you want to write it and send it over, that's fine, but we've got the record here of what we need to get from your request. So that's what I was saying, but we've got the video here. Anything else? Mr. Frisbee.
Briefly, and just I asked this of Ginny, if you do have a relationship with somebody on the CCC, if you could reach out to them as well and just describe the dilemma that we have here, which is we want 2 of these, not 4. We have 4 out there. At what point can we relay to the CCC that someone is or is not operating within our bylaw? Because it's almost like the contractor at risk. We want that as close to the end date as humanly possible. We want them to be ready to open their doors and then relay to the CCC, okay, they're complying with our bylaw. You grant them your license if they comply with your regulations, and we'll have an open establishment. Again, there are a bunch of these now. We're not reinventing the wheel here, but it just, for whatever reason, we've run into some difficulty.
Ms. Kramer, that's a good question. I mean, is the CCC available to municipal boards like ourselves to have discussions?
I can ask that question. It's not my sense at this point that is the case, but we're lucky to have Margaret Healy from the Attorney General's Municipal Law Unit, who's a Grafton resident and has always been very helpful. And I think, the CCC is, like somebody said tonight, and I can't remember which one of you, was not anticipating municipal, how it's going to work, boots on the ground. So, they're a state level agency and they feel like they have, their, what they have to do, and they're not necessarily thinking about what you guys have to do. So, but it's, it's a disconnect that can be bridged, and I'm happy to do that. And like I said, their general counsel gave me over an hour the other day to try to hash through this, but I think, now I have much more information and insight into where you guys are than I did when I had that conversation. So it's something that, she told me she would follow up on with her staff, and I have an open line of communication with her. So it's definitely something I can follow up on with her.
Thank you. I figured it's worth asking. Thank you
And
very
see if
much.
there's any other municipality who has, been in these shoes. Because the town council, network is, one of the best ways that I have ever gotten information. It's like, hey, who's faced this issue? What did you do? What did you learn? What can you tell me? And, this is a small bar, the municipal bar, and they're, extremely helpful and generous with their experience and advice. So that's something I can just throw up there on the listserv in the morning and see, who's faced this issue.
All right. Thank you. Okay. All
Okay,
right. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Okay.
good dinner. Okay. Bye.
All right, thank you very much. So next up, we're going to pass over on Grafton Sustainability Commission, but we're going to roll in solid waste collections coupled with the FY22 revenue projections and general budget discussions. I'm going to give Mr. Terenzini some leeway here. Carter, however you want to interlace the two, because I know one has to really do with the other, or however you want to structure the next two topics, I think we're fine with.
Okay. Well, first, I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible, given the hour. That we sent out the initial revenue projections. I reviewed those with the Finance Committee. I think they appreciated the conservative nature of them, but a number of the members expressed concern that they were perhaps a bit too conservative and might be constraining the expenditure budget more than needed. Subsequent to that, we had more information on the state budget front. They actually had improved the education aid a bit over where we had thought it was going to be, and we went back through some of the numbers, and we've attached the most recent estimates here. The estimate is an increase subject to the various assumptions of approximately $1.85 million. I sat, and I think that revenue projection would hold up if the level state aid holds up. If that doesn't, we do expect cannabis, at least one of them, to be open come July 1, and we think there's perhaps room come July 1 to look at the new growth. So I think that 1.8, 1.5, somewhere in there is going to hold up reasonably well, unless there's a dramatic drop in the level state aid. So the second step was sat with the school superintendent to talk about how much of that we might be able to provide to the school department. And I used a very simplistic, how much of the total general budget was the schools, and it's roughly 60%. So we suggested to the superintendent $1.14 million. Bear in mind that we carry all of the health insurance and the like. That was the sharing that we had some general discussions on, and I believe it's what he's building his budget upon. So the third,
Carter?
yes.
Yeah, just before you move on with that, is that in line with historical allocations?
I'm not, frankly, completely sure how the historical allocations have been done. I'm not, the superintendent said that they really hadn't had that kind of conversation. They would kind of come in with their budget and deliver it. And then the response would be, well, we really can't afford that much. Or we can afford this much. This, frankly, this is my first time with you and last and only time with you on this matter. I think that's probably better posed to the superintendent. I think this may be, my sense was it was the first time that we sat down and looked at how to apportion those monies ahead of time, Matt.
Okay. All right.
That's just my sense of it. I don't have history on that.
Got it.
So we have been working our way through the town budget. We've met with Public Works. We've met with Rec. We've met with library, building, police. We've been through quite a few of the major items. And so far, we want to draw your attention to the impact of the requests from the library, $400,000 plus or minus about $300,000 request on their side and then about another 125,000 in benefits. They have a number of new positions that they've requested. In each of those, we're essentially at the 20 plus hours. And as you know, anything above 19.5 creates a liability risk for benefits. The school budget will not carry the SRO this year, which means it needs to come onto the town side of the house. There's around 50,000. Health insurance, we don't have a good projection on that just yet, but I'll talk with NFP over the next few days. And those have to be met with that $740,000. Now, wasn't addressed in this memo specifically because we had set it forth at length in the other memorandum, was the potential risk of 175,000 plus or minus on the solid waste. I would say that the solid waste and the retirement system are the two greatest uncontrollable risks, or strike that. That the solid waste is a big risk that I think we do have some control and ability to influence. And we would look forward to your sense of direction on that as soon as the board feels comfortable in doing so. We're going to clean up this memorandum so that it is a single memorandum, including the solid waste. And I just noticed that on the spreadsheet, the last column was cut off, so you don't see which note goes with which item. I did include to you to show you how we got to that 60-40 split and the how the education aid in my projections doesn't line up when people look at the cherry sheet, because I use net revenue numbers, showing the gross revenue without having a way to offset it with the expense somewhere doesn't give you a clear picture. So my revenue projections use gross numbers. I don't want to belabor how we got to all the balance of those. I think we've walked you through the 5-year rule and throwing out the high and throwing out the low and how we did that. I think that's really truly covers it in a fairly short few minutes there. And I thank you for your patience as the hour grows late. Happy to answer questions. That's where we are as of right now.
Thank you. Mr. Prisby.
All right, thanks. So are you saying that your recommendation for the overall school budget would be based on the percentage of revenue going to the school down from 70 down to 60?
Yes.
I don't understand that.
Okay.
If I can be plain
Sure.
with you. And here's why I don't.
Sure. Yep.
Because other than Massachusetts being persnickety about who gets to run a particular department, whether it's included in a city budget or a school budget, it seems to me that a department's budget needs what it needs. And assigning a percentage to it seems to me to be arbitrary. If we've decided in this community that we, for instance, value education and we're going to hire more teachers or we're going to do whatever, then that budget goes up. If public safety concerns are paramount in a particular community, as they are typically in larger communities, then that budget goes up. If we decide that, my lord, demand at the library is such that we cannot do without more assistant librarians, then that budget goes up. But to assign percentages to it, it doesn't move the needle for me. Why do I care whether or not it's 70 or 60?
So the theory is that I must create a budget to present to you, and the school superintendent needs to create a budget to present to his committee. And that budget, yes, should reflect needs, but also must reflect the realities of the income that we believe would be available. And so the thought is to take all the new revenues that are coming in. Let's just say it's $2 million for simplicity purposes. And you look at historically how much of the budget has the education side of the house consumed and how much of the budget has the general fund side of the house consumed. And for the last year, it was essentially a 60-40 split. And so you say, okay, you've been 60% of the budget. We've been 40% of the budget. The new revenue looks like it's $2 million. And so to give people a head start, we'll split up the new income based upon the historic spending patterns. And so you should think in terms of having 1.2 million new dollars for your needs, and we'll think in terms of having 40% to meet our needs. Otherwise, we're just designing budgets that perhaps, yes, meet the needs, but they aren't constrained in reality in any sense.
Oh, I know, and you have to constrain them in reality in subsequent meetings. So, for instance, as we've talked about in this community for years prior, the education budget would consume 100% of the total overall budget. Were we to go unchecked, maybe 120 and maybe 150%, and that's not our reality. So you have to come to that balance between who gets what somehow. It seems to me a better way to do it to say, okay, each department has to evaluate their needs for the next fiscal year and make an argument as to why it needs more. And this is sort of, it goes back to my problem with a lot of the assumptions that I think people make about compensation, about expenditures, like as though if they just argue hard enough, then that money is going to be forthcoming. And again, it goes back to that staffing conversation that triggered me earlier. Yeah, we'll get sidewalks done when you give us more staffing. No, we're not. We're not. I'm sorry. You have people in your department and you're going to have to make that work with what you got, and you have to justify the expense. And what the schools do, and I think they do well, is they zero budgets, or at least they go through the exercise, and I know how zero budgeting works with schools. Like, you clear it all out and you add a bunch back in because it's mandated anyway. But it's an exercise that you go through to at least be able to say, all right, well, this is what we see coming in the next year. Here's our argument for more. And I know you got to start someplace, but starting at sort of arbitrary points where it's like, no, it's 60% this year because I know we need 40% over here, makes me nervous, because there's that department over there that's getting the same amount or more than they got last year, even though they might not need it. Or there's a department over here that's getting less than they might need, even though they can justify it. So I don't like the percentage-based approach.
How else do we start building a budget? We need to bring you a budget that is balanced. And you will get my version of the balance on the general fund side of the house. And you may disagree with that. And you may say, Carter, you're recommending less here in the library, but we think we need more in the library. And we think we're going to take it from here because that's our priorities. But to build a budget that simply reflects what we think is the needs with no constraint on it, I don't know how to do that.
No, I'm sorry. I think I'm getting some feedback. I think the constraint on it is, based on what the departments are going to tell you that they need, and then the negotiation process thereafter. And I know there is a certain extent to which you can't say to the school department, okay, well, I get it. It's 100% this year because this is what you say you need, and they can obviously justify that need. But at the same time, I think I need to hear a little bit more from each department head going forward, school side and municipal side, about needs as opposed to this is what I got last year, so I'm just tacking it on this year. For instance, clerk's office. We had half the staff missing this year. We've had throughout the municipal center people out for a lot of the year. We've had in the school department, some staff not there. Is it really just a rehash of last year's budget, sort of remixed, or can we take a harder look at what we're really spending?
You can, and you would do that through the budget review process, but to come in and to deliver to the select board the wish list of all the departments and say, okay, guys, now you figure it out. I just don't think's a good way to proceed. I mean, I can certainly do that. We can just assemble everything.
I guess what I'm hearing is a different process than what we're accustomed to, Mr. Prisby. I think you may agree, where I guess there's a budget review process coming up where I guess we get to weigh in on, to your point, like what are those priorities and what do those dollar allocations truly mean? And does it align with, us as a policy board? Does it align with our view of where revenues are allocated for town services? Does that sort of resonate with Carter? Does that sort of resonate with what you were saying?
It does. I can tell you that there's not enough money to meet the needs of all the departments.
Well, yeah, I think that's true of every municipality, unless
Yeah.
you're Weston. I mean, but yeah.
Or Wellesley.
Wellesley, or yeah, right. But I think all in all, I guess Ed, like, what are you envisioning? I guess so. We're getting this data tonight, and we're asking these general questions. It sounds to me like there's a process in which the board is participating and going through.
Yeah, I mean, I don't look. Maybe it's just a starting place. I think my big objection to this has always been assigning an arbitrary number to what is already arbitrary, which is the municipal side versus the school side. I think it's a distinction that really ought not to apply to budgets. It's one budget to me as far as I'm concerned. I don't pay two tax bills. I don't write out two separate checks, one to the school side, one to the town side. As far as I'm concerned, it's one budget. And if one department is increasing in costs more than others at an exponential rate, which we typically have seen from schools over the past 20 years, then obviously it's something that bears watching, because you don't want to be left with a municipal center that's understaffed, which is part of the complaint that we had tonight. And that we'll hear, I think, over the course of the next couple of years. But by the same token, that I don't want the end result to be an automatic default, because I've had this conversation with past board members where it's, well, it last year was 57% of the budget, now it's 60%, and that's too high. No, because there's a service that's being provided here at the end of the day. So if we're starting at a place where it's like, okay, there's a delta here between what we think we ought to fund one department versus others based on history, okay, that's a good place to start. But that's just not where I want to end. Like, I think that's the beginning of the discussion, not the end.
I see. Okay. Mr. Karanzini.
But the fact of the matter is, you're not one organization. You're one tax bill. But this state has determined that the education side of the house will be funded by a body of elected individuals who will determine the best budget for the school district, school department. And we do the best on our side of the house. And to say to the school department, when the superintendent says, how much do you think you can give us this year? To say, well, just submit the budget of what you want, puts us then in the very unenviable position of arm wrestling with them of, well, no, you don't really need that, or no, you don't really need this, or we need to cut you here. I think that it is much better, much cleaner to say, this is how much of the revenue we think we can give you. I don't need to know anything else. It's just your bottom number. I'm not getting involved in your line items. I don't know your operation. You have an independent elected body to make those decisions. And here's a process that I've followed to lay out for you how much of the revenue I think I can give you. That's my reasoning. Not saying it's great, just trying to lay it out there for you.
No, and I understand that tension, because again, we've done this before a few times. We've got there are two ways you can do it. There's that way, and the way I'm suggesting involves, I think, a little bit more cooperation from both the school committee and at the end of the day, the finance committee, to come to a determination, not to get in their line items, which, I mean, there's a reason. I've always told people there's a reason I'm not on school committee. I really do not want to do that job. But at the end of the day, I think we value along the way the year-to-year conversation that we have with them, because it sets us up for the long-term understanding about what the goals of the community are. And, you know, I'll be frank with you, I consider education one of the values of this community, which is not to say that we're going to throw all our money at it, but which is to say that they are the most important thing that we do. Public safety is probably next, and infrastructure is probably after that. There's only a few things that the community does as a whole. We teach people, we keep them safe, and we get them from point A to point B by providing infrastructure, and everything else after that, in my mind, is kind of gravy. So what I don't want to do is necessarily hamstring them arbitrarily. I've always encouraged them to think openly and freely about what their budget is going to be and come to us with it, and then let's have the conversation. That's just always been my philosophy about it.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments on Mr. Terenzini's projections for FY22? Any questions on the trash recycling part of the memo as well? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Hoffman.
Yeah, sorry. Just want to make a long meeting longer. I know Carter was looking for some direction in terms of, you know, how to proceed forward. The options were kind of laid out pretty cleanly, I felt, in the memo, in terms of, you know, so I guess, Carter, is there something that you need immediately from us to be able to continue assembling the budget and to potentially tackle one or two of those big decisions that we need to make to be able to do that?
I think that over the next few days, and I would put a fairly short window on it, if there are things that you would like us to explore on the solid waste issue that we haven't explored. So for instance, I sent Mr. Canoyer over to look at all the glass waste to say, okay, you know, is there something we can do here so that we can use this in some beneficial way to help trim costs? If there's something that you think of, it doesn't feel like it's answered all your questions, you would like to see some what if models of, okay, you know, what do you think the slippage is if we go up this percent, and what does that raise, and what does that leave us? That would at least let me get some supplemental information to you, so that when you are able to take this up at greater length on January 12th, I can have had that supplemental information in your hands, and then you can, you know, kind of weave that all together, perhaps to move closer to a decision. If we wait until January 12th for me to get all those questions, then we're into February some point, and we're starting to run the clock out on a couple of things. If you want a bid option, I'm losing time. I can't get it done.
Yeah.
If you're not going to make any changes, I need to make cuts in the budget, so I'm bringing you a balanced budget. If you are going to raise rates, you're going to want to have probably at least one public discussion, and you want to give people as much lead time as possible, because there's going to be a bump, and we need to work with the vendors, because there's going to be a bump in purchases in the last 2 months of the fiscal year if the rates are going up. So if we can get to a point where you can give me a cleaner sense of direction by January 12th, and I can get there if I can get any additional questions you have, let's say by next Monday. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Well, there was a couple of things, I guess, that I had thought about reading through that memo. One thing that occurred to me is it possible to go with a longer term contract? If we went with a 5-year versus a 3-year, is that even an option? And would that save us money in terms of the incremental increase? It seems like the increase that's in the proposal is 2.5. Could we knock that down a little bit by going longer term? Would that be something that the vendor would value? Locking in a longer term contract.
But the odds are not. I had to struggle to get him from 3 down to 2.5 because remember, he has to do this at state prevailing wage rates, which he can't make projections on and over which he has no control. The contract itself is exempt, but the obligation to follow state wage rates, there is no exemption for that. So it depends. The real issue here, that's only about $15,000, give or take, of this 175,000. The challenge here is in trying to come up with a formula, perhaps that the contractor would be agreeable to, which perhaps caps the commodity processing fee, perhaps can cap the amount of tonnage you can put through.
Yep.
And can create some sort of profit sharing where it gives him an opportunity, and in return for his risks on capping the rate and capping the tonnage, gives him an opportunity on the upside, should there again be an upside, where he's getting the first $25 a ton or $30 a ton, and that's all yours. That's the reward for your risk. And then we can maybe get into some profit sharing. I think that that's probably the only real room for a lot of negotiation as I see it today. If there's other ideas, Ed's, does contracts. Ms. DeFazio's done recycling operations and been involved in some of these things. If there's other opportunities and you see them, by all means, please send them to me that I might explore them.
Got it. All right. Second question is, are there competitors? So if we were to go out to bid, I'm not familiar with the players in the area. Is it worthwhile?
So Republic has gone out of business. Casella bought their business. So you basically have WM Waste Management, E.L. Harvey, and Casella in this region. And I will just, I remember Rutland, Vermont, the home of Casella, where the school committee put their waste collection out to bid, and they didn't like it the first time, so they bid it again, and the prices went up. And they didn't like those, so they bid it again. And John Casella, if I recall correctly, and this was a few years ago, walked away, like $18,000, $20,000 more on the last go round than he bid the first time around. I mean, there's not a lot of folks that can do this at this scale.
Right.
And there is a risk in putting it out to bid. That doesn't mean that you should necessarily dismiss that. There might be some competition there. But the base price itself is really not horrific. The challenge here is the commodity pricing. That's the challenge here. The change in the commodity market.
Thanks.
Let me just tell you that a proper bidding process from start to finish would probably be around 6 weeks. Just keep that in your mind as you watch this clock countdown. That would probably be about the most compressed we could do it in, from you saying go to having specs, getting it advertised, and doing all the steps that you have to do.
I have a question for the board, and this is just a follow-up based on talking about recycling and trash. And I meant to ask this earlier. Did we still want to have like a public hearing on this? Is there still a desire? This is going back a couple of meetings. This board was interested in having an open public participation. Mr. Fabio?
In my opinion is I think we're a little premature on this. I think we need to kind of come up with a little more of a plan, maybe after January 12th. And if, Mr. Chairman, I can tack a question onto that answer, is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
So Carter, as far as, can you explain to me a little bit, and I know I've been, I am familiar with the recycling market, but I was years ago. So when you're talking about commodity tonnage, is that tonnage right now going to Wheelabrator, or is it still going through Harvey at their facility?
Oh, Harvey's dealing with all of it.
100% still,
100,
right?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the price of the commodity tonnage, we're talking about the recycling market, correct? And what they do with the recycling, and that's what's driving
Yes.
the price, correct?
Yeah. And that is that one sheet came directly from Harvey of what they got for that month. That was a sample.
So
Yeah.
So I know this is not going to be a popular thing to say, but I'm just going to start the hard discussion because, I had a reputation 10 years ago, so I can bring it on back with some really maybe not so great ideas. What would it be like to eliminate recycling in Grafton and just have curbside pickup of trash?
I can double check, but I don't believe you can under the statute. In fact, private haulers now are required under the statute to offer recycling. You would have to, we would have to explore at a minimum creating probably some drop sites, but we can look at that over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean,
Alternatives.
again,
Curbside.
just as an alternative, what would it look like? Again, I mean, I don't like going this route any more than anybody else does, but if we're talking about very high cost of getting rid of recycling curbside, what does it look like to have a recycling center in town? Potentially at the new DPW site. I don't know. We have to think about all those things. And I didn't know that it was tied to the trash contract as well now. I think that's new. So maybe it would.
Well, that's Harvey's interest in renewing the contract. Basically, what he said is, yes, I want a new contract. Yes, I will do it for 2.5%. But look at what's happening to me on the commodity pricing. I've been eating this now for basically 2 years. I can't keep going on doing that.
The inverse of that, I'm sorry, Mr. Treadsley, but to the inverse of that, when everyone brings up that commodity discussion, they made out when it was advantageous for them.
Exactly. And, and my other point is, if there's an opportunity to have a one trash hauler and one recycling hauler, is that something we look at and go out to bid with?
Sure.
So.
Yep. And that's exactly the kind of thing that we need in the next few days, so I can try to explore these things over the next couple of weeks for you.
When I'm a little more awake too, at a different hour, I will send more comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. All right. So, Mr. Often.
Yeah, just quickly. So, Carter, you're looking for some direction on some of this over the next few days. Are we going to put this on the agenda for our next meeting, or are we looking to? Okay, yes. That's fine.
Yes. Tonight was to get this information, have a general discussion, ask some questions. I'm sure we'll have some more questions between now and next week. Please reach out to Mr. Terenzini if they do come up and they're pertinent. And if they're important, you think the rest of us should know when we put this on the agenda for next week, definitely bring them to all of our attention so we understand. You might have a question that we're not thinking about at 10:07 p.m. tonight.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Anything else? Well, thank you very much. We only tabled one item. Ed, sustainability is coming up in January. Okay. I appreciate you allowing us to table that tonight. And I appreciate the board and its indulgence in moving some things around to get this meeting in a reasonable hour. At this point, I can entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
All those by roll call vote, please. Mr. Fazio,
Fazio, aye.
Mr. Often,
Tonight.
Ms. Roy,
Roy, I.
Mr. Prisby,
Yeah.
Peter Carlson, aye. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great night. Thank you.